Notre Dame fans, welcome to a special edition of the Irish Breakdown podcast. My name is Brian Driscoll. I am the publisher at irishbreakdown.com. I don't know if this is a special edition, but this is going to be a recruiting edition. Maybe that's what I really meant to say when I talked about special, is we're going to talk some recruiting today. So a lot of team topics to come up, obviously. Tomorrow, we're going to have a special guest. We're going to have Claudette Montana-Pattison here on the show tomorrow. We're going to talk USC. What's the latest with USC? Talk about that rivalry, getting that back on track. So that'll sort of be our USC preview. We're going to preview the rest of the teams in the schedule. Lots of camp information. Vince will be at practice on Thursday, so we'll get another chance to see the Notre Dame football team in action. But today I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about recruiting for Notre Dame. And I wanted to kind of look at, I was driving around a lot yesterday, so I had a chance to talk with a friend of mine just sort of about where this recruiting class is and where this class stacks up right now amongst the all-time best recruiting classes of the Brian Kelly tenure, and then what it would need to do to sort of finish with that being the best. And then, of course, we know this past week, after getting Tobias Merriweather and CJ Williams, Notre Dame jumps up to number one on the Rivals rankings, which is partly because they have so many more commits than other people. That's just the nature of it this early in the process, or at least this stage in the process. So then we look at it and say, okay, well, what would Notre Dame have to do to finish with that number one, number two, like that top three caliber class? And I'm going to do it because I've said this, I don't care about where they finish in those rankings, but I know a lot of you do. And so I do want to talk about just what I think they would have to do to stay in that top three group. But then, and also it serves as sort of okay, we've kind of wrapped up the summer. As far as I know, these are all the 2022 commitments that are scheduled, that are anticipated. These are done. There's plenty of guys on the board, but those aren't guys that necessarily have set dates to commit. There's one player that could make a decision soon, but it would kind of just be he wakes up one morning and says, okay, I'm ready to be done with it. And we'll get into that. So it's sort of a State of the Union on 2022 recruiting, and then just kind of talk about what would have to happen for Notre Dame to get to the point where they can take that step and finish with that coveted top three recruiting class from a recruiting ranking standpoint. So not from a practical standpoint that you and I may sit here and say, yeah, it's a top three class, but more of what the recruiting rankings and the recruiting services will do. So I want to dive into that today, and then of course we'll answer some questions, and I know there's some 2023 questions out there, and we'll answer any other questions you have about the recruiting class or the team. So let's just kind of start off with the offense. Obviously, the offense got two huge additions in the last week by getting Tobias Merriweather and CJ Williams, and it's like the offensive class looks a lot different now with those two players in the class, but I think that's the side of the ball that ultimately is going to determine whether or not this class can be a top two or three group. And I just don't know if there's a lot they can do to fix that, to be honest with you. You look at running back recruiting. Obviously, Jadarian Price is a good player. I think one thing that could help the staff is if Jadarian goes out and has a great senior year and maybe gets a jump in the rankings. That's always something that can help your recruiting class, is if, like Aiden Schuler having a great spring. And jumping up, going from a 3-star to a top 250 guy certainly helped Notre Dame's recruiting rankings. And if Jadarian Price can have that kind of jump, the receivers on the board, Major Everhart and Xavion Bradshaw, are not necessarily needle movers from a recruiting points standpoint. I think they're certainly needle movers from a practical standpoint, but not from a point standpoint. And then you look at offensive line. There's 3 players on the board, and all 3 would move the needle to a degree. Obviously, you have Billy Schrouth. Where things stand with Billy Schrouth. Well, running back too, Quinshon Judkins is on the board. He's also, again, not a guy that's going to move the needle from a recruiting ranking standpoint. Now, he is interested in Notre Dame. Notre Dame is interested in him. He's scheduled to visit for Notre Dame's September 11th matchup against Toledo. And I think if Notre Dame gets him on, if they are able to get him on campus that weekend and they decide to actually push for him, which right now is not, it's not determined that they're definitely going to push for him to the point where they would take him, I think they'd have a shot there. I'm not going to say they're his leader, but they'd have a shot there. He's a kid from Alabama that's coming up to visit Notre Dame. He understands what Notre Dame's about. He likes it. He's interested. And so there's certainly a level of interest there with him and them. But from a recruiting ranking standpoint, really the guys on the board that can move the needle offensively are the linemen. And I think practically speaking, there's a need for another lineman in this class. The question is how good is that lineman going to be, rankings-wise or practically? Ranking-wise, if they get one of the 3 guys on the board, it's going to be a positive. Obviously Billy Schrouth is a top 150 guy. Zach Rice is a 5-star recruit. And Emil Wagner's a top 150 recruit in most people. 247 has him as a top 100 recruit. So clearly those guys would move the needle from a recruiting ranking standpoint. Schrouth to me is the guy that practically would move the needle the most. I think Zach Rice is a very good player. I think he's over. I think he's let me say this. I don't like using that O word. I think he's better. He's not as good as maybe the rankings would indicate, but he's still a pretty good player. And then, of course, you have Emil Wagner, who's a bit of a wild card. But rankings-wise, from a recruiting ranking standpoint, getting Emil Wagner would be very good for Notre Dame because he is considered a highly ranked recruit. I have some concerns about him, practically speaking, just because of his frame. He's a very talented player, but he's ranked high, so that would certainly help. So if you look at the offensive class, they've got to finish with one of those 3 offensive linemen. I think that's the key. The other positions, running back, wide receiver, those aren't necessarily positions you're going to have needle movers. Look, they're not really in the mix for Andre Green Jr., in my opinion. If he visits in the fall, I'll be a tad surprised, but he may still come. I just don't see that one happening. I think at this point in time, that's where the offensive class is. They've got their 2 huge pickups at wide receiver. They need to finish with some an offensive lineman in this class. Here's another thing that I think could help this class from a recruiting ranking standpoint. And that is that Ty Chan starts to really take that jump as a senior. Now, we didn't get a chance to see him as a junior. And so we don't really know what Ty Chan's going to be this year. And so, excuse me, we have to find out, can he make the jump that I think he's capable of making? If he does, he could go from like a top 250 kind of guy to a top 100 caliber guy real quick. And then the same thing is for Ashton Craig. So I think offensively, if you're someone who's looking for this team to finish with a top 3 class, you need them to land one of those big linemen, and you need at least one of the linemen to have a jump, or Jadarian Price to sort of have a jump, or potentially even a Maureen Walker. We've already seen ESPN put him in their top 250, but if a Maureen comes out healthy, if he shows off the speed that people talk about him having, that Notre Dame thinks he has, that he showed at the Alabama camp, if he can show that on the field this year, being from where he's from, he could jump up the rankings too. And that's something that could certainly help them with their recruiting rankings at this point in time. Now let's talk about the defense. This is the side of the ball already that is carrying this class, even with the additions of the receivers. There are really 3 things that need to happen for Notre Dame on defense for this class to really finish as the best defensive class in the country. It's going to be in the conversation. It already is in the conversation right now. But to finish with that, but then also to have enough star power to say, hey, they're going to be a number 1 to 3 ranked class. The first one is you have to get Xavier Nwankpa. I think that's a must. Now, where things stand right now, Ohio State obviously still the main contender. I think it's still going to come down to a Notre Dame-Ohio State battle. That's where I think it's going to be. That's how I think it's going to finish, is between those 2 schools. As I've said all summer, my stance has not changed. The longer this one plays out, the better it is for Notre Dame, in my opinion. I think Notre Dame has really built up a strong connection with Xavier. The next 2 steps are building a strong relationship with his family, which is happening daily, and then him continuing to build relationships with the commits in the class. I think that's going to be a very important piece to this. He's going to visit this fall. I'm not sure which game it is. I've heard from some people it might be the USC game. He may come sooner. I would hope and think that it would be the USC game. If he's part of this is going to depend on his time frame. He's talked about wanting to decide during the season. He may want to decide by the time the USC game comes around. So then he may want to visit sooner. Hopefully he's willing to stick it out long enough to where he can visit for the USC game. I think that would be the ideal scenario for Notre Dame. But he's a must get, and he's a must get for 2 reasons. Number 1, it fills a position of need, huge position of need. Well, it's really 3 reasons. 1, huge position of need. Practically speaking, it's very important. Number 2, Xavier's a highly ranked player. He's a guy that when you look at his overall recruiting rankings, with the exception of, I think, 1 service, I think ESPN has him low, but I think all of us understand that ESPN's rankings are not necessarily ones to be taken very seriously. But you look at his other rankings, he's the number 13 overall player in the country by 24/7 Sports. He's the number 35 overall player in the country on SI 99 and on the Rivals top list. And then he's 162 on ESPN. He's the number 57 overall player in the country. So I think obviously getting a kid like him, if you look at like the Rivals 247 rankings, not the composite, just their rankings, you land the number 13 player in the country, the number 35 player in the country, that's huge. For SI 99, obviously SI 99 does their rankings. SI All American does their rankings differently. It's more subjective, less objective, meaning they take into account, need, size, impact, talent. It's more of just hey, I believe this class is better than that class. It's not a point-based system like some of the others. But for all three of those, a guy like Xavier Nwankpa is a needle mover. There's no question about it. And the reality is the rankings are skewed towards top 25 to 50 caliber recruits. That's just the way that the rankings are skewed. And the higher you are, the more huge boost you're going to get from a recruiting number standpoint. So Xavier Nwankpa certainly fits that need. And then the third part of that is part of finishing with a top class is not just landing top players, but it's making sure the schools you're in competition with for the top class don't get you beat them for certain players, right? So Ohio State right now is behind Notre Dame when it comes to the recruiting rankings, according to 247 Sports and to Rivals. So how do you stay above Ohio State? It's you keep adding players, but then you beat them for some guys that they want or they think they're going to get. That's obviously a big part of that too. Xavier Nwankpa is one of those guys. Then you look at the defensive line. So obviously the loss of Darren Agu, practically speaking, was certainly a loss. It was absolutely a loss. He was a really talented football player, a high upside player. But from a ranking standpoint, he wasn't a guy that necessarily had a great impact on the class at this point in time. So then you look at the class and you say, okay, you lose him. What opportunities does that open up now for scholarships? Well, obviously Notre Dame has really been on Anthony Lucas this entire time, and they're still going to stay on him. We're going to talk about him, but then it opened up an opportunity for them to go push for Hero Kanu. And I'm going to talk about Hero first because it ties into the conversation that we just had about Xavier Nwankpa. There's three reasons why Hero Kanu is a very important recruit for Notre Dame at this point in time. Number one, he's a very good football player and at a position that I believe is a need, which is a more pure interior player. Number two, he's a top 100 caliber recruit. I believe both Rivals and 247, I believe both have him as a top 100 player. And that's, again, those top 100 players are the big points getters for these recruiting rankings. And so when you look at his rankings for Rivals, he's ranked number 80 in the country. You look at his ranking for 247 Sports, he's number 84 in the country. He's number 79 on the composite list. So he's a highly ranked kid, and I think because he's still kind of new to football, I don't see him taking a step back this year as a senior in high school. I think he's going to take another step forward. And then number three, right now, I would say that Ohio State is the biggest competition for Notre Dame when it comes to Hero Kanu. I think those two schools, now there's others involved, Alabama, there's other schools involved, but I think those two schools to me right now have the edge. So if Notre Dame's able to beat Ohio State for these two recruits, they would be huge, monumental wins. But it also keeps Ohio State from adding two more top 100 players to their class that they want. So that helps as well. So it's that three-tier aspect. Now, the key for Hero is going to be getting him back on campus for a game and continuing to build that relationship. Ohio State had a bit of a head start on him when it comes to building that relationship. They have some built-in advantages from a relationship standpoint. Notre Dame has some built-in advantages from a non-football coaching relationship. Obviously, with Alexander Ahrensberger, obviously Brandon Collier, who runs that European program, has a great deal of respect for Notre Dame, and so I think that helps as well. But it's the staff's going to have to convince Hero that they're where he stands on their board. So that's a big one. And then finally, you get to Anthony Lucas. That one could be the ultimate game changer for Notre Dame. Now, Rival still has him ranked as like a 150 kind of guy, but he's a 5-star caliber range. He's a top 20 caliber player for 247 Sports. He is a top 20 player for SI All-American as well. He's going to be a highly ranked player when it's all said and done. I have a feeling Rivals is going to eventually come around on him like they did with Liam Eichenberg and have him ranked higher. And that'd be another big one. But again, that's a guy that Texas A&M wants. That's a guy that Alabama wants. That's a guy that Miami wants. And those are three programs that are going to be battling to be in that top 5 along with Notre Dame. And when I'm referring to top 5, I'm talking about the top recruiting rankings, not the top 5 for Anthony Lucas. So those are three that are big. And the latest with Anthony Lucas is it's kind of still the same way it's been. I think that who the perceived top school is changes for him week to week. Alabama one week, it's Texas A&M the next, it's Notre Dame the next, it's Miami the next. What I know about this recruitment is Anthony and his family like Notre Dame a lot. They like the unique aspects of Notre Dame. And I think that's why they're in the game right now. The relationships plus what makes them different. Now the final piece for Notre Dame is they have to give Anthony another good reason to go there football-wise. I think academics, big check mark for him and the family, right? That definitely that box is checked. Relationship, box checked. If they can go out there and put a big-time product on the field this year, I think that's going to help him a ton. And I think there's two players that he's going to have his eye on that if they can have really productive seasons in this Marcus Freeman defense is going to be successful. And because that's the key right there is this was not a defense that really was a monster numbers defense for defensive linemen. I mean, you've had some good numbers. Don't get me wrong. I mean, Julian Aguar in 2018 had 12 and a half tackles for loss, 8 sacks. Jerry Tillery had 8.5 sacks, 10.5 tackles for loss. Khalid Kareem had back-to-back years of, 10 to 11 tackles for loss, 4 to 5 sacks. Adi Tagumba Ogundeji had 7 sacks this past season, but it's not like the monster numbers you see from other programs. And that we've even seen from Notre Dame in past years. When you look at Stephon Tuitt was a double-digit sack guy. Sheldon Day in 2015 when he had 15.5 tackles for loss. In this defense with Marcus Freeman, I expect there to be more production from the front four. And I think that's going to be important. I think Myron Tungavaloa is a guy that I believe Anthony Lucas is you could use to really impress Anthony Lucas, because Anthony Lucas's thing is he's kind of got the body of a 3 technique, but he's got the game of a power end, and he wants to be an edge player. Notre Dame is more than willing to accommodate that. If he wants to play end and he can stick it in, they're more than happy to do that. And so I think Myron Tungavaloa moving from 3 technique to the big end position in this defense, it could be a great selling point for Lucas, for if you're Notre Dame, to look at it and say, hey, look at this guy. He was a 3 technique. We put him down. We streamlined his body. We don't put a bunch of weight on him. We took weight off of him. He goes to big end. He has, 10 tackles for loss, 4 or 5 sacks, and, he was a 3-star recruit, right? And then you look at the total production from that position with, if Justin Ademilola is playing over there, if Nana plays there, if Alexander Aaronsberger plays there, if Riley Mills gets some playing time there, which I could certainly see that happening, then you can look at it and say, look at the total production of this position compared it to past years. You need to be a part of this. Then you can have the 5 technique stuff where then you're watching him playing in the 3 down fronts where they're playing a 5 technique, and you can look at him, Myron Tungavaloa and Jason Ademilola. But then also I think Jason Ademilola is going to have an impact too, because Anthony has said he understands there's times where he will move inside. If Jason Ademilola is moving inside as an undersized 3 technique, 285 is not necessarily it's not small, but it's not the typical 295 to 305 or some of the big boys you see in the SEC. So he can be 280, 285, be athletic, be productive, be disruptive, getting into the backfield, making plays behind the line. Then that's going to be further evidence to Anthony Lucas to say, look, we got production from the big end, we got production from the 3 technique, we got production from our 5 techniques when we go to our 3 down front. And you're every bit as good, if not better, than all those guys, right? That'll be the pitch to him. And I think if you can kind of put that product on the field, that's going to help you, because Alabama's product speaks for itself, right? Miami, who he likes a lot, grew up a Miami fan. Miami just put 2 defensive ends into the first round of the NFL draft, right? That product is selling itself. Texas A&M is expected to have a great defensive line this year, led by DeMarvin Leal. So that's who your competition is. You have to be able to match that on-field production. If he loves the academics, if he loves the relationships, but the football piece is down, then that's going to hurt him. Notre Dame needs to be able to sell all 3, like Marcus Freeman has talked about in the past, to where, hey, you can come here, you can be a great player, you can be an All-American, you can put up big-time numbers, and you can get a great education, and you can build yourself for the rest of your career, and you can be a high pick, and you can play for championships. That whole package is there. It's just they have to convince him of the football part. And that's going to be the key with Anthony Lucas. And I think Notre Dame is in striking distance to do that. They're just going to have to, now it's about what happens on the field. But back to the recruiting aspect of it, if you can land, you have to land 2 of those 3 defensive players and 1 of the linemen to have a shot to stay in the top 3. Beyond that, it's going to require a jump. So it's going to require Devin Moore making a jump. It's going to require Benjamin Morrison making a jump. Now, those jumps should happen. I think those players should be ranked higher. Devin Moore is the number 80 player in the country on in the SI 99. Now rivals in 247 have to follow suit. They have to have a better idea of who he is and jump them in the rankings. And those are the kind of things that you look for. It's not just about who they have or who they're going to get, but it's about the guys that they have also making a jump. That's going to be a big part of this whole thing. So that's kind of where things are. That's where things stand. If you want to get into more specifics about where things stand with players, Billy Schrouth, it hasn't changed since a few days ago when I talked about this. I feel a lot better about where Notre Dame stands now than I did a month ago, but not as good as I felt 2 months ago when he was basically in the class. So that's going to be one. Zach Rice, I don't feel as good today as I did before. I think Notre Dame was able to strike strike a hot moment. They were able to get in there. Now it's going to be about, can you stay in it for the long haul? I have some doubts about whether that's going to happen. They're going to give it a shot, but they have to be careful that they don't put so much emphasis on Zach Rice that they lose sight of those other guys. Because if you put all your eggs in the Zach Rice basket and you don't get him, and then you've missed out on Billy Schrouth or Emil Wagner or some of those other players, you could be in trouble. I think another thing Notre Dame needs to do offensive line-wise is they need to expand the board a little bit. They need to look for some guys they can flip. They need to tell the recruiting analysts, hey, that'd be Bill Reese and his crew, hey, look, we are looking for some rising senior offensive linemen that maybe are under the radar, maybe some late bloomer type of guys, some guys maybe we can flip that fit what we're looking for. And I think that's something you have to do too. You can't, I wouldn't put all my eggs in the Zach Rice basket. I'll just leave it at that. And then Emil Wagner, obviously, I'm not sure if Notre Dame's going to make a push for him right now. I think they could, if they did, they'd have a good shot at getting him, but it's not a given. And I think part of it is because Ohio State and Notre Dame haven't pushed for him as hard some other programs have, Maryland, Kentucky, for example. And I think that certainly helped those programs. At receiver, Notre Dame is supposed to get a visit in September from Xavier Bradshaw. I think the next month for him is going to be huge. And the reason I say that is because he's got to make the visit. He's got to do everything that they tell him to do. If they ask him to send him film or transcripts or whatever else, he's got to do it. He's got to make that visit. But by the time he makes his visit to Notre Dame, he will have played some games. And I think if he starts the season off on a hot note, and then the visit goes well, you may see Notre Dame make a move on him. Not a given, but you could see them make a move on him. And to me, that would be a really good, smart decision by the staff. And then there's Major Everhart. I'm curious to see if he's going to schedule a visit anytime soon. I think the longer it goes where he hasn't set up a visit, I think the less interest I'll believe he has. But I think those two guys are important recruits more practically than they are recruiting ranking standpoint, but that's the latest with those guys. So just not a lot of movement right now with recruits. There's just not a lot changing. Teams are in fall camp. These players are starting their fall camps. This is the time of the year when you're just not going to see a lot of movement. So, a lot of the questions of what's the latest with so-and-so, it's going to be the same story kind of day after day. It's not going to start moving again now that some of these commitments have been made. You're not going to see a lot of movement until kids start getting on campus in September. That's going to be the next batch of movement where kids are going to make their visits, get to see schools and things like that. That's going to be the important piece. But there's still relationship building to be had. There's still recruiting pitches to be made. It's just not going to be as hot and heavy with the actual coaches. It's going to be people like Chad Bowden and Dre Brown and those kind of guys doing a lot of this now since fall camp is underway. And that's true at a lot of these schools. So that's the latest there. So that's kind of where we're at with Notre Dame recruiting right now. I think I'll say this. I think that this is as close to being a legitimate top 3 class that for Notre Dame than they've been since 2013 when they actually finished with a top 3 class. Now, it ended up not panning out quite as well because you lost Eddie Vanderdoes, who ended up not being a part of the class. And, that kind of put a little bit of a wrinkle in things in regards to that class and how it was able to finish and just how good it was. But it was still a top 5 class. And, but the thing about that class that this class won't have is that class had several 5-star recruits. You obviously Jalen Smith, and Max Redfield, Eddie Vanderdoes. You had Greg Bryant was a 5-star recruit by, I think Rivals had him as a 5-star recruit. I can't remember, but you had those high level guys that kind of bumped your overall numbers because they were those elite players. I think this class doesn't have as many of those type of guys, at least from a ranking standpoint. But what it has greater depth, and I think that's the thing that's going to help this group out. So that's kind of where things stand with Notre Dame recruiting. That's where things stand with just sort of what Notre Dame needs to do. I hope I answered those questions that we've had about, what does Notre Dame need to do to finish in the top 3 or finish with the number 1 ranked class. I don't know if number 1 is possible. They'd have to kind of get that inside straight to do that. They'd have to get, Schrouther Rice. They'd have to get Canoe. They'd have to get Anthony Lucas, and they'd have to get Xavier Nwakpa, and they need at least a couple guys to kind of jump. I just think because when you look at it, the thing that'll help them is Clemson's going to have a bit of a smaller class this year. Bama's probably going to take a little bit of a smaller class this year. Ohio State's had some losses. So I think there's some things working in Notre Dame's favor, but now they have to really kind of take it to that next step. So that's where we are at. And with this portion, so that's kind of gives you an idea of where things stand with Notre Dame from a recruiting standpoint, and at least with the 2022 class. Now, of course, Notre Dame's going to start moving on to the 2023 class. We're going to see a lot of those kids on campus this summer or this fall. Notre Dame's already zeroed in on who they want at certain positions, like linebacker. It's a no-brainer. They want Drake Bowen and Sonny Styles. That's it. I mean, that's the goal. The cornerback board is kind of settling into form of who their priorities are. Defensive line, because of the commitments of Keon Keeley and Brennan Vernon, that board is kind of settling in of who they want, what their numbers are. Other boards are still evolving. The running back board's evolving. The receiver board is evolving. The offensive line board is evolving. The tight end board is evolving, but also come out of it in clear view of where things stand. So that's going to do it for this portion of the podcast. Now we're going to dive into some of your questions about Notre Dame recruiting and Notre Dame football. Okay, so let's dive into some questions here today. It is on Tuesday, August 10th. I know there's a lot of team and recruiting questions, so let's dive into this. Tommy Guns in the show has Schuler said what date he's going to commit on yet? That obviously is Aiden Schuler from Irvington High School in Irvington, New Jersey. He has said that he is going to commit. As the latest information is on August 15th is the plan. It's going to come down to Notre Dame, Penn State, or Maryland. Where Notre Dame stands with him is Penn State and Maryland were considered the top 2 schools for a while. They had been on him for a little bit. Notre Dame was talking to him, was not a name that I was told much about or really anything about. When people asked me about him a couple weeks ago, I didn't know who he was because in my conversations with Notre Dame, that was not a name that we had really discussed. Where that one came about is he actually camped at Notre Dame this summer and apparently did great, tested very well, looked great in drills, really impressed the Notre Dame coaching staff. And he's got good sophomore film. I've watched a little bit the last couple days. I don't think he's the elite athlete that maybe some other players that they've recruited the position are, but he's a really good football player. And I think if he can have a jump in athleticism, that would make him a much, much more effective player. And that's kind of where the summer camp stuff comes into view, because if he showed Notre Dame the athleticism, and they, when these kids come to camps, they run 40s, they run shuttles, they do vertical jumps, they do a lot broad jumps, they do a lot of the stuff that kind of allows the staff to evaluate their athleticism. Well, the football piece checks out, right? The film checks out. You watch the film, he's instinctive, he'll hit, he can come downhill, he's got good ball skills, he's got good instincts. He's got a lot of the skills that you look for in a safety, but he doesn't have great size, but safety size is not as important as people make it out to be. If you go look at the size of the starting safeties in the NFL, there's a lot of 6 foot and below guys in the NFL. And I think he's got a lot of those traits, especially his feel for the game. He takes good angles with the football. He gets his hands on a lot of throws, things like that. All that stuff checks out. The thing that I'm unsure of when I watch the film is, okay, he's a good athlete, but just how good of an athlete is he? I think that's a bit of a question mark on his sophomore film. And that's going to be with a lot of kids as sophomores. Outside of the really freaky special kids, players kind of evolve as they get older. They get faster and quicker. He's got nice feet, good agility, good balance, but is he a really explosive athlete? Well, on sophomore film, he really wasn't an explosive athlete. He was a good athlete, but not an explosive athlete. Then you hear that he goes to Notre Dame this summer, and he's kind of going into his junior year, and that's when the first jump happens. There's two jumps that really happen in most kids. Usually it's kind of from sophomore to junior year. Some kids will make it a little bit earlier. Usually you'll see a little bit of a jump from sophomore to junior as kids physically mature. And this isn't even weight room maturity. This is just I'm going from a 15 to a 16-year-old, just that jump that a lot of us made. Puberty happens and all that other kind of stuff. And so you'll see a little bit of an athletic jump, but a lot of times that jump, that real big jump, is from their junior to senior year. And you'll see guys get a little stronger, faster, more explosive. Well, if Aiden is kind of having that first jump this offseason, which is what we're hearing happened, that's what showed it is Notre Dame performance at that camp. Then all of a sudden you say, okay, you put that with the instincts, the intangibles, the production, the technique, the just all the different things you do see on film. That's what I think impressed the Notre Dame staff, and they want him. I mean, when I first heard he was committing, I was like, they're not going to get him because he's not a guy that I've really heard of. I don't think he's necessarily a take for Notre Dame. And then I make some calls, and they're like, yeah, he worked out for them. And I think it was I'm not sure of this. I didn't get this answered specifically, but I believe he was one of the guys that came in that those late July camp workouts, like Avery Johnson, like the Fegan kid from Illinois, and impressed him. And they offered him and made a push, and he likes Notre Dame a lot. Now, so I like where Notre Dame is going into that August 15th decision. That's in 5 days. I think Penn State's obviously a factor too. Penn State's a tough school in New Jersey. And so they're going to be a part of this too, but I like where things stand with Notre Dame so far. So that's where we are with that. Matt Romero's in the house here. Alan English, everybody. Notre Dame 2164. Everybody's kind of in here for today's show. Jojo Pineda, what's left to add, guys? I'm assuming an offensive lineman, safety, D lineman, and anything else, maybe Bradshaw, any more wishful thinking. I mean, obviously, we talk a lot about this. Here's something that I did not mention that is going to be interesting, and we've had some people talk about this on the message boards, and we've had this chatted about before too. But this is going to be an interesting year. This is the kind of a season where having a staff like with a guy like Bill Reese on staff is important, because there's a lot of kids that would have been evaluated and seen jumps as juniors, didn't get a chance to do that because COVID took their season away, or they had a shortened spring season, and some kids weren't able to go to camps. There's going to be a lot of kids compared to past years where you're going to see some guys take big jumps as seniors, and you're going to want to be open to those. So you may say, hey, look, we want another offensive lineman, and we're down to Schrouth, Rice, and Wagner. But some kid like another Ashton Craig type of kid comes along and he just kind of has that breakout senior year. You need to be open to those kind of guys. Same thing at running back, same thing at receiver. So I may say, hey, look, I love Xavier Bradshaw. That's the dude. But then some other kid steps up and he's even better. You need to be open to that. And so I think that's something that could impact this class as well. And we're definitely going to see that with 2023 kids as more of those players start getting out there and playing. We're going to see more and more of those kids on the list. And then Rivals released their top 250 today, by the way. And they did have Aiden Schuler as the number 213 player in the country. So obviously that's a relatively high-ranked player. Keon Keeley was number 106, I believe. And then Brendan Vernon was number 8. So Notre Dame's certainly off to a big start in that regards, as far as where they are from a recruiting standpoint. Shane O'Shea, best coverage in the business. Not sure if you've covered this, but thoughts on Aiden Schuler and Cooper Flanagan. They both have crystal balls to Notre Dame. Now, I've said this before. I don't put a ton on the crystal ball things just because we've seen this a lot. Remember, there was crystal balls from Mac Markway to Notre Dame, and we've seen a lot of that. But I think there's definitely legitimate smoke to both of those two. The Flanagan kid is interesting because, when I watch him, he's a good football player. Right? He's a good football player, but I just kind of feel like you've taken 2 tight ends, like what now, 3 years in a row. Are you really in a position at Notre Dame to say, hey, we're going to take a guy that's not an elite best of the best tight end? And to me, he's a kid that has some skill, but is he Jackson Howard? Is he Deuce Robinson? No, I don't think he is yet. And of course, I love De La Salle. I love being able to get kids out of De La Salle. That's talk about bringing kids in with the right mindset, that winning mindset. That's De La Salle. and Cooper is a bit of a throwback tight end, a big tight end. He's more athletic. I'll take him over Mac Markway any day of the week. First of all, let's be real about that, because he actually is a passing threat. He's not just a glorified blocker. But he's not Cole Kmet athlete either at this point in time. But he's a good football player. He's a guy that can play a lot of attached stuff. He's a guy that can be a blocker. He's a guy that can work the middle of the field. Has enough speed. He's got a really nice burst off the line. He's not like a burner kind of guy, but he's got a really nice first step for his size. Can get downfield, can work the middle of the field, can be an ISO guy against linebackers and safeties and things like that. So he's a good football player. But my question was, are you going to take him? And then that means you can't get Jackson Howard and Deuce Robinson. Well, then I did a little bit more digging on this, and it sounds like Notre Dame is open to taking 2 tight ends next year. I don't know how they're going to be able to get all these tight ends on a roster, but I think part of it is planning for the fact that Michael Mayer is going to be a 3-year player. And, one of their tight ends is having some injury issues. So I think there may be some planning for that moving forward. So there is a chance they could take 2 tight ends in 2023, something a month ago I would have not thought was possible. And Cooper Flanagan, that's where I start to like Cooper Flanagan a lot more, is if he's going to be part of a 2 tight end set, then I can dig that for sure. And let's just say Notre Dame's able to get Deuce Robinson, for example. That's my number 1 tight end on the board. If you haven't seen him, he's from the same high school as Tosh Baker. He's from Arizona. Very, very talented player. Love that kid on film. He's kind of a modern, the quote unquote modern tight end. He's 6'6". He's going to end up being 240, 250, but he's a Tyler Eifert type. He's a not quite Kyle Pitts, because Kyle Pitts is a different body type. I think Deuce is going to be a lot bigger, but he's that Tyler Eifert, that that George Kittle's, that guy that's going to spend more time unattached and outside than he is attached to the line. That's Deuce. Well, then you put him with a guy like Cooper Flanagan, who's more of a traditional tight end. And I guess traditional is probably the better term than throwback, because I think throwback leads to not catching a lot of balls and blocking a lot. But I guess throwback in my age and throwback for somebody who's 25 is going to be a different kind of player. So I think a traditional tight end, right? The kind of guy we think of when we think of a tight end that can block and line up attached and stretch the field and catch the ball. That's what Cooper Flanagan is, but he's an attached guy. And then if you're able to add him with the Deuce Robinson, who can be more of a flex kind of tight end, well, that's a really nice duo. And so if you're telling me you're going to take 2 and Cooper Flanagan's one of those 2, I can dig that. I can dig that a lot. And there'd be years where Cooper Flanagan would be fine as a number 1 tight end in a class, especially the way that Notre Dame has recruited tight end the last 2 years with Kane Barong, then this year with Holden Stace and Eli Raridan. There's some really good football players. But if you can get him and get another one of those 2 guys, because the 2023 tight end class so far is really good. I mean, I've seen guys in Notre Dame's not even recruiting that I'm like, goodness gracious, this kid's really good. It's a deep tight end class, much better than the 2022 tight end class, in my opinion. So if you can get a couple of those guys and you have at it, especially if you feel like your roster is going to work out in a way over the next couple of years to allow you to get to that point. So it's a good question, Shane, and appreciate the compliment very, very much. I don't appreciate Thomas Walsh, though. What's up, IB fam? Rested, rejuvenated, and ready after chilling in Cabo. So I'm over here grinding in northern Indiana, getting all this content out, and you're hanging on the beach in Cabo. The only thing that's going to make me forgive you is if I find out you at least rocked your Irish Breakdown hat one of the days while you're there. So if you did that, then we're cool. All is forgiven. But hope that you came back and you're ready to rock and roll, man. Kenny Moore's obviously ready for some recruiting talk. Michael Johnson, afternoon IB family, afternoon Michael, and rest in peace to Coach Bowden. So yeah, we talked about that the other day too, and we lost one of the great ones as a coach and as a human being when Coach Bowden passed away the other day. Let's get up here to some of these questions. We have a super chat from Patrick Barnes. Patrick is in the house today. Appreciate that, Patrick. Oh, and you're coming with some fire today. Okay, here we go. Is Jeff Quinn a subpar recruiter? It seems like with the success of the offensive line, ranked recruits should be jumping at the chance to come to Notre Dame. I don't think he's a subpar recruiter from an overall standpoint. I think that you don't get Tosh Baker, you don't get Rocco Spindler. I'm not saying Blake Fisher because I don't think it took much to get. I mean, Blake was going to come to Notre Dame, in my opinion, unless they screwed that one up. To get. I don't think Joey Tonona was a lock to come to Notre Dame. He had a real nice affinity for Ohio State. To get Ty Chan, to get some of the guys they've got, you can't be a subpar recruiter to get them, Patrick. I do think, however, that he's not up to the par of the elite offensive line coaches. He's not what Harry Hiestand was as a recruiter. He's not Coach Bedenbaugh at Oklahoma. He's not Coach Stud at Ohio State. He's not Matt Luke at Georgia. He's not what Kyle Flood was at Alabama. He's not that. He's definitely a step below that, which is why Notre Dame has been struggling to get the kind of depth of the O-line classes that they've needed. Look, their top two in every class is pretty good, but they had nobody behind them in the class of 2021 or 2020. The 2021 class has Joe Alt, who I like a lot, and then Caleb Johnson's a solid player, and then Pat Coogan, who's just a depth guy. And then this year, you took a flyer on Ashton Craig. And after that, it's like kind of where you're going to be. So he's got to finish strong in this class for me to really feel like he's able to recruit at that elite level that is needed. Would I say he's subpar? No. Would I say he's as good as he needs to be? No, he's not that either. And anyone being objective and honest should be able to say that. Anyone that's being objective and honest should be able to say that the recruiting has not been the same under him since he took over for Harry Hiestand. It just hasn't. And he's going to have to get better at that. And I think he's a good guy. I think kids like him. They respond well to him, but he's just not a closer. He just doesn't have the track record or the personality to really close the deal. And see kids that go over there, so, hey, I really like Coach Quinn. He's a really good dude. I like him a lot. Okay, but you didn't pick that school. You didn't pick Notre Dame. You went somewhere else. It's a problem. And I think that's something that we have to be willing to address. Got another super chat down here from Griff Weedler. I don't get to make the live show too often, but I figured I'd jump in today and just let you and Vince know how much I love the channel. I look forward to the podcast every day. Keep up the great work. Griff, I appreciate that very, very much. And I appreciate you taking advantage of the time to jump in today and join us and to share those kind words. And then also, of course, to leave us with the super chat. I appreciate that also very, very much. It means a lot that you guys support us the way that you do. You guys and gals support us the way you do. It really does. And I don't know if we do a good enough job expressing how much we appreciate all of your time and the financial support you all provide us, but it really is appreciated very, very much. Kenny Moore says, I don't know much about Schuler, but everyone seems to think when he pops, it will be for us. So Kenny, I want you to do me a favor. I need you to shoot me an email, first of all. And second of all, I want you to, because I respect your opinion on recruits, I want you to check out his film and let me know what you think about him, because I just recently watched his film too, and I liked it. I thought he was a good player. He's better than I thought he was going to be. And yeah, I'm curious to get your opinion on him. I'd like to hear that. Patrick Barnes asks, when is Billy Schrouth committing? Anyone know? He does not have a date set. I think it's just going to be one of those things where Billy's just going to kind of call the coaches one day and say, hey, I'm committing. And then they'll probably do something where they'll make a graphic for him and he'll probably put it out on Twitter or something like that. Yeah, I think it'll be something like that. He's not a media guy. He's not a showmanship guy. He's not a, hey, let me have this big announcement kind of guy. That's not really his style. So I think he could just call and just say, hey, here's what I'm thinking. Here's what I'm going to do, and go from there. But hopefully it's Notre Dame, because I like Billy Schrouth a lot. If I could, this is going to be a hot take. And I don't know if anyone's going to agree with this, but if I could only have Billy Schrouth or Zach Rice, I'd take Billy Schrouth. I think he's a better player. And I think he can play tackle. I think Zach Rice is definitely a guard. I don't think he's a tackle in college, at least not in Notre Dame's offense. All right, BRKR1. I think I got that right. Respect to Brian, not just his Notre Dame knowledge, but at college football overall. Thank you for that. Only person to have LSU as a playoff team in 2019. How about a show on your Power 5 conference predictions and playoff predictions? So we will get to that. I'm actually trying to work on getting some. So just so people know, if you've read Irish Breakdown, you'll have seen this. And if you're a member of the message board, you'll see some of these other things. But I've put 3 of my Power 5 conference predictions already on the message board, and we've kind of had some discussions about that. So if you have not signed up for the message board, you should, because that's where we can have a lot of fun back and forth about this. Because I also like to put it in a format where other people can make their predictions, not just me always giving info, but you all have opinions I like to hear as well. I'm going to do the Pac-12 probably later today, and then I also have to do the SEC, and then that'll just be for the message board probably. I may do something close to the season where I kind of put it out in an article, but we're going to do some shows as we get closer to the season, sort of looking at college football, looking at my top 25, looking at my playoff predictions, looking at my Power 5 conference winner predictions. So we definitely will have that. And then the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to try to bring on, it's like as I kind of look at like my top 5 to 10 teams, like who are the playoff contenders in my opinion, and try to bring on beat writers from those teams and talk to you all about, we'll bring somebody on from Alabama. I've already talked to somebody about that. Try to get somebody on from Oklahoma and Ohio State and all those type of things, just to kind of say, hey, what's the latest with these teams? Where do they stand? What are your expectations for the team this year and the playoff type of thing? So, so that we'll definitely do that. And I like hearing things like this because I know a lot of people just kind of only want to hear about Notre Dame, but I like talking about all of college football. And the LSU thing was interesting because I did have them as a playoff team in 2019, but I did not predict them to win at all, and I should have. And the reason for that is it's similar to what I've said about Notre Dame is I felt for years that LSU was just a sleeping giant. They were a very talented team that was held back by coaching. And when I heard that they had hired Joe, I didn't know who Joe Brady was. I had no clue who he was, but I had heard they hired him to open up the offense. And when I heard that, I was like, phew, you give me that team with that talent, with an opened up offense, they're going to be a playoff team. And I didn't think Alabama was going to be great in 2019. I thought they were going to be good, but not what they normally were. And I'll be honest with you, I wasn't as high on Tua as a lot of other people are. And I thought their defense was going to be not as good, and it wasn't. And so I did have LSU winning it. I wish I would have predicted them to win it all. Then I really could have bragged about something. But no, I did have them as a playoff team that year, and they were even better than I thought. I liked Joe Burrow a lot. I did not think he was going to be what he was. Like, I thought he'd be a good player. I thought he'd throw for 3,500 yards and 30 touchdowns, and they'd score 38 points a game, throw 40 points a game, which for LSU is really all they needed to win a lot of times because of how good their defenses have been in the past. They shot way past that. I didn't know how good Clyde Edwards-Helaire was. I knew how good the receivers were. I knew how good Burrow was. The offensive line was good. The defense was good. There was a couple guys I wasn't expecting Burrow to be as good as he was, and Clyde Edwards-Helaire was way better than I thought he was. So yeah, that was fun. But we'll do some of that. But a lot of that stuff, honestly, is going to have to happen on the message board because we can't do a bunch of shows on that because then all the Notre Dame fans will just stop watching. We don't usually get as much. Yeah, we don't get as many people on the shows about when we talk about those things aren't necessarily directly related to Notre Dame, but I'm going to do them because I like to do them. We just don't do a ton of them. Wake up the echoes. Coach D, love to hear your analysis on all things Notre Dame. Thank you. I appreciate that very much. My neighbor coached against Xavier Bradshaw last year, and his take on X was that he could play at any level of college and play well, and any team is lucky to get him. I agree. I just think he's out in the middle of nowhere. I think that's the big issue. But the film, to me, is really impressive. Really impressive. Brendan Cascorna says, is basically every top guy on the board except Shrouth and I slated to sign in December and commit at an All-American Bowl. Canu, Lucas, Nwankpa, Wagner, I think. So I don't know about Wagner, and I do expect Lucas to decide late. Nwankpa's talked about committing during the season. That's my understanding of what he's told schools. He's going to commit during the season. Shrouth, I think it could go any day. He could carry it in the fall. I don't expect him to commit soon. I just think he could wake up one day and say, yes, what I want to do. That's what I'm going to do. But Lucas is going to be late. Canoes is going to be late, but I could also see him. I don't think he's necessarily locked into that. I could see him finding, hey, you know what, this is where I want to be. And I think with some of these kids, it's going to be they're going to commit silently to a school and then announce at one of these games. I believe is going to happen too. Wagner, I'm not sure of. I'll have to look into that one. But a lot of these kids are going to be in season or late in the season. So there's going to be, I think, a little bit more December intrigue for Notre Dame this year than there has been in the past. There was like none last year. In 2020 class, there was intrigue about Isaiah Foskey. Or 2019 class, there was intrigue about Isaiah Foskey because he went into signing day, but people that covered the team, we knew that he'd already signed in December, and we knew he was going to pick Notre Dame. So there wasn't a lot of intrigue. I think this year there could actually be some intrigue in regards to not just that you all don't know who's going to commit, but we don't know who's going to commit. Because a lot of times we kind of have an idea if a kid's going to pick Notre Dame or not, and We just get our stories ready and let the kid make his decision and his announcement, and then we follow up with all the breakdowns. And I do respect how, for the most part, people that cover Notre Dame, they'll do their crystal balls and their predictions like we do as well, but they don't just come flat out and give the kids' business away, which I think is how it should be, to be honest with you. But I think this year is going to be a lot more intrigue. Like, hey, we're not really sure how things are going to go, and that's going to make it fun. I think I miss the winters of leading up to signing day, and there's like 7 or 8 kids that you're not sure if they're going to pick Notre Dame or somewhere else. I kind of miss that. Like, I kind of miss the Manti Te'o thing. I know it's good for business for us to know, because then we can have stuff going. We can hint and we can do little things. But just as a fan of college football, I miss the days when you're sitting down and a kid's getting ready to commit, and you're just like, oh my gosh, I'm so unsure of what he's going to do. Nowadays, like, there's no intrigue. Like, did anyone really go into the CJ Williams or Tobias Merriweather press conferences really thinking that they were going to pick anyone other than Notre Dame? I don't think so. I do kind of miss the day of when those things that was the case. So I do. Delusional Jack Cohn fan. So I just can't help but laugh every time I see this avatar. I appreciate you commenting. It makes my day. It makes me laugh. It's good stuff. I enjoy that. My man Kenny Moore says, I love Amorian Walker. I think Amorian Walker is getting ready to make a huge jump with his ranking. Walker has immense potential. I trust you on that, Kenny, and the Notre Dame coaches feel the same way. But for me, I just don't see it on film. I see the size. I see the ball skills. I mean, there's things about him I like. I don't see the explosiveness that people say he has. And part of that's because he was injured last year. I get that. That's why I'm kind of really curious to see him this fall, because if he has the kind of year, put it like this, if he's the player that Notre Dame thinks he is, you're going to be correct. He's going to skyrocket up the boards. I mean, Notre Dame loves this kid. And there's a question, AJ says, I kind of have a feeling Walker won't end up in the class. Visited for the Michigan barbecue is a bit of a red flag to me. And if he jumps in the rankings, other schools will push hard for him. And I think you're right about that, AJ. I do think he likes Notre Dame a lot, but he's a guy to me that could really, really jump up the rankings. No, and the point I was going to make to tie it into Kenny's comment is, if he was a lesser product, if Notre Dame thought about Amorian Walker the way that I think about Amorian Walker, they'd have told him to take a hike when he starts visiting all these schools, and especially when he did the Michigan visit and didn't tell him that he was going to visit Michigan. There are other prospects that they would have said, see ya. The fact that they haven't done that with Amorian says a lot about how Notre Dame views him. They think he's really, really good. They think they have a gem there. I don't see it, but I'm open to seeing it if he can show it to me on film. If he can go show it to me on film as a senior, great. That's awesome. I can only go by what I see, and I don't see that. Now, I also think AJ is correct in that if he does blow up this year, Bama's going to push, LSU's going to push, Georgia's going to push, Clemson could push. I mean, there's going to be a lot of schools, Texas, a lot of these schools are going to get on him. Look, Notre Dame just beat Texas for a receiver they wanted. They may try to go repay the favor and try to add Amorian to the mix if he comes out and has a big year. So they're going to this recruitment, in my opinion, is far from over, in my opinion. Delusional Jack Cohn fan asks, are we going to get highlights from every fall practice like we did in the spring at some point? No, we're not. I've asked about this, and they're not. They put out their little like 1 minute thing where it's like the clips are so fast and there's so little of them that you really don't know what's going on. But that's pretty much what you're going to get. And then when there's 6 practices that the media will have access to, you'll get some videos from them, but it's going to be like 6 of 25 practices. So you're not going to see a ton from fall camp. You're definitely not going to get the 3-minute B-roll that Notre Dame put out in the spring. Unfortunately, they're not going to do that. Delusional Jack Cohn fan also asked, and is there any word about how fall camp is going outside what the media has had access to? So right now, they just finished their 4th practice today. They haven't even put on full pads yet. So, we've done a little bit of digging. There's not a whole lot else other than, hey, so, this guy's doing really good. I've heard a couple of the D linemen are having really good fall camps. Receivers are making plays, but it's early. I don't want to get into that expectation of like just putting out these daily updates, because there's just not a lot you're going to gather from the 3rd practice of the year. They just wrapped up their fourth practice of fall camp. I mean, again, they don't put full pads on until tomorrow. They've only had shoulder pads on. I think this is the second day. So there's not a ton to gather from that. Although there's been a lot of clips of Jack Cohn throwing in those things they're putting out. So you should be pretty happy about that, because obviously you're a delusional Jack Cohn fan, which I think is awesome. I think it's hilarious. Notre Dame 2164. We will land. It's a nice little bold prediction here. We will land Schrouth, Rice, Nwankpa, Lucas, and Canoe. Please, Lord. I don't know if they're going to land both of those offensive linemen, but that would be certainly huge. No question about it. Andrew Goss, I don't know what that means. I have no clue what FOMO means. So if you could, let me see if I can see down here. Okay. Fear of missing out. I think Notre Dame has fear of missing out on their side with Notre Dame's rich history, especially if Notre Dame has a killer season. I get that. I think there's something to that. I think a program like Notre Dame, and it's not just Notre Dame, but there's other programs like it. I think a program like Notre Dame, because of their tradition and their history, because they haven't won in so long, I do think there's an attractiveness to going there and doing something new, as opposed to going to Clemson and doing something that's already happened twice recently, or going to Alabama and do something that's happened, 7 times in the last decade plus. I do think there's a notion to that. I do think that's attractive, but Notre Dame has to prove that it's close. And to your point, if they do have another great season, do make another playoff run, or at least challenge for the playoff, then yeah, I think that there's going to be some merit to the notion of kids are going to want to look at Notre Dame and say, I could go there and do something special. And the pitch that Notre Dame can sell is, you win at Notre Dame, you become a legend. You win at Alabama right now, you're just kind of the next in line. If you're a quarterback, you can go to Clemson and be like the next Trevor, or the next Deshaun Watson, or the next Taj Boyd, or you can go to Notre Dame and just be who you are, because that's just the way that Notre Dame is. And it's because of how long it's been. Now there was a time where it was, you want to be the next Rocket, the next Tony Rice, the next, Joe Theismann, whatever. You can be the next Jerome. I mean, you sold that because they were winning championships, at least one a decade, and you'd be the next legend. Well, it's been so long. Notre Dame hasn't had a Heisman Trophy winner in over 30 years. They haven't won a title in over 30 years. So you be that guy, you're a legend. And now in this era of NIL with profit, with the kids making money off of their name, image, and likeness, if you're a 5-star quarterback, you want to make some money. You want to have a big name, and you want to have a big brand, go win at Notre Dame. See how that works for you. And I think that's true of a lot of these big time players. So I do think there's, it's finally a bandwagon you want to be a part of if you're a big time recruit. At least they're getting closer to that point. SMP 15 says, in my mind, the remaining recruitment board for Notre Dame is Xavier Nwankpa, Jake Pope, Zach Rice, Billy Schrouth, Anthony Lucas, Cyrus Moss, Hero Canoe. Is there anyone I missed? I would take Jake Pope off that list for now. I would take Cyrus Moss off that list for now. Notre Dame is still recruiting Cyrus Moss, but they're not going to get him. I would add the 2 receivers, Major Everhart and Xavion Bradshaw. I would add Emil Wagner, offensive line, and I would add Quinshawn Judkins at running back. I think those are the guys that I would look and say are that's the board right now. It's small. It's definitely small. Now, I could see some guys adding, as we talked about early in the show. I could see some guys adding if you have some breakouts this year, some guys that kind of make some jumps that are some under-the-radar players. I think there's room for them as well. Chief Brody, what's up, Brian? What's up, Chief? Appreciate you being part of the show. John Rich with the comment. Thanks for joining us today, John. ND education obviously is elite. Other colleges also can tout excellent reputations. How effective is the argument that Notre Dame players actually graduate? It's very effective. It is. And look, a lot of these schools have sort of overhyped graduation rates based on how they count it up, but I think that matters. But I think it's more about the quality of the education. It is more of what separates. I mean, Miami can sell a good school. USC can sell a great school. Florida actually in some ways can sell a great school. Ohio State can. But like you said, there's that notion of, yes, but do they actually go there and do that? That's the difference. Miami has a great academic reputation. Does anyone think that when Howard Schnellenberger and Jimmy Johnson and Dennis Erickson were winning titles, that they were selling the academic reputation of that's why kids were coming. No, it wasn't. They were selling football. And so I think that's the difference is, yeah, you may have a great school, but it's not something the football players are necessarily tapping into. Notre Dame can sell that. And Notre Dame stresses that. And it's a part of Notre Dame's entire DNA when they're talking to recruits is that aspect of it. And that's not necessarily true in other places. And I think that's what separates Notre Dame. But I do think the graduation rate is important, which is why what is one of Notre Dame's, one of their mantras as a program? It's graduating champions. That's what there's a reason they emphasize that phrase is because they do want to put out that aspect of that graduation thing. And also, too, John, I think Notre Dame's graduation rate has room to even get even better because the institution has finally given in to the need for early enrollees and that number being so big, you're going to see more and more of some of these kids that go pro, or some of these kids that would have transferred. So those are the two categories, especially the kids that would transfer. You're going to see more guys like DJ Morgan, more guys like Micah Jones, more guys that are early enrollees or come in, even some guys that come in the summer that are now able to graduate in 3 years. They may stay an extra year, get that degree, and then transfer. Micah Jones, 20 years ago, probably would have transferred after his first or second year because he knew they weren't going to give him a shot to play. I'm not saying that's right or wrong. That's just he was never a factor. But because he was an early enrollee, because he was able to get classes, he was able to leave after 3 years. He still has at least 2 years to play, potentially 3 depending on the COVID year, but he has a Notre Dame degree. So I think the early enrollee thing for Notre Dame is going to be huge for the institution and the athletics program because, number one, I think early enrollee is so important to players getting off on a good footing academically because there's not the pressure of games. Like, think about all the freshmen that showed up in July or in June. They have been nothing but football this entire time. And they're taking summer classes, but it's not the same. It's not like in the spring where you've got the full class, you've got normal schedule, you've got 12 to 15, sometimes 18 credit hours. It's different. Then you go through a month of fall camp where there's almost no academic stuff. And then you dive right into the school year. And by your second week of the school years, you're just getting acclimated. Oh, by the way, you're traveling to Tallahassee to go play Florida State. And then a week later, you've got a game, and then a game, and then a game. Practice every day. In the spring, it's practice every other day. No game. It's only 15 practices. You've got a lot more opportunities to get acclimated academically, which I think then by the time they get to the fall helps them. So there's that advantage. The other advantage is you're a semester plus a summer school head start. And that's why you're seeing a lot of these kids graduate in 3 years. And I think that's great for them. It's great for the institution. And it's also going to help them with their graduation rate, which is already really high. So I think that's a positive for Notre Dame as well. Jay Wiki Jr., could you see them trying to flip someone like Singleton, or has that ship sailed on running backs? I think they could try. I just don't think Lance Taylor is the kind of recruiter that is good enough to flip a guy like that. He can prove me wrong. I'd love for him to prove me wrong. But the reality is, other than Chris Tyree, who they lost, and then Chip Long got back, I mean, who's the big-time recruit? Look, I love Logan Diggs, love Audric Estime, right? Love those guys, love Jadarian Price. I'm not knocking them for bringing in good backs, okay? So don't take this the wrong way. But those aren't elite backs. And if you look at who they beat for those guys, they had to hold off LSU, who's coming off of a dumpster fire of a season for Logan Diggs. You beat Michigan State for Audric Estime. You didn't really beat anybody good. You beat kind of like Stanford for Jadarian Price. So it's not like they're beating the big boys. And he's definitely not flipping people so far. Now, could he go out and prove me wrong? Sure, I'd love that. Go get Nicholas Singleton. I'm all for that. I just don't think he's capable of doing that. I hope I'm wrong. I hope he does, but I just don't see it. And I don't know if he has the kind of grinding desire as a recruiter to do it either. So until he proves me wrong, that's kind of where I'm typing. Where I'm typing. So I was reading something that Tommy Gunn said, where I'm at with that one. Brent Byer says having 16 or 17 four-star players is silly. That's incredible depth considering we will add 3 to 4 more with potential for multiple 5-star players when all is said and done. Lucas, Snead, Rice, and CJ Williams. I think you need to add Tobias Merriweather into that conversation as well. I know, and again, for me, he's their number one recruit. He's the top recruit on the board for Notre Dame right now. Chief Brody says, I'm not sure it has been asked, but is this a legit top 5 type class, Brian? Yes. Like right now, it is one of the 2 or 3 best classes in the country. No question about it. I think the question is, can they stay there? Yeah, they can. I asked a friend of mine who's been following recruiting for, 40 years last night. I said, if Notre Dame doesn't add another player, where do you think this class would finish? And he was like, probably 8 to 10. That's without adding another player. I think we all agree they're going to at least add a couple guys. So I think I'll be shocked if it's not a top 5 class. I think to not be a top 5 class, they'd have to lose somebody. And I don't even mean lose somebody like Amorian Walker, because he's not really a needle mover rankings wise, although Notre Dame loves him. They'd have to lose somebody that's really good. And I just don't see that happening. And then they'd have to completely strike out with the guys on the board. And I don't see that happening either. So yeah, I think this is a top 5 class. Will it end up as top 5 because of Rivals point system? I don't know. And don't care. But for me, I'll be shocked if this isn't a top 5 class. I think the question now, Chief, is, and this is kind of why we did the show today, is can it be 1 to 3? I think that's the goal now for Notre Dame. Can you finish in the top 3? I think top 5 is absolutely doable. It's can you finish in the top 3? I think that's the question now. That what I'm talking about is the whole, okay, the finish is important. The finish is what's going to define this class ultimately. And that's kind of where I'm getting at with all these recruits and why we went down this list is, if you want to be a top 3 class, if you want to get to that point, then you got to finish strong. If you don't finish strong, then we're going to look back and say, boy, it's a really good class, but it's not, it may not be the generational changing pro type of class. It's got a chance to be, but it's a guy or a couple guys away from being at that point, in my opinion. It's really, really good, but I think it just needs a little bit more. And so that finish is going to determine what this is going to be. And there's another guy that could jump up in the rankings that I haven't talked about, and that's Steve Angeli. Look, part of the reason Steve Angeli isn't ranked high is because, including by me, because I don't rank him that high right now, 3.5 star, top 350 type of guy, solid player, is because he only has 6 games of high school film, varsity film. That's it. And it was in a COVID-shortened year. He's a big kid, 6'3", 210 plus, decent arm, decent athlete. He could go out there. He plays in a really great league in New Jersey for Bergen Catholic. If he goes out there and has a breakout year, all of a sudden he jumps up in the rankings, and that adds some value because right now they don't have that premium position quarterback that's ranked high. ESPN ranks him high, but the others don't. So that's another one that could have a big impact on the team's rankings this year is if Steve Angeli just comes out and just really shreds it in that league. And he could see a big jump in recruiting rankings, and I think that would help Notre Dame. Notre Dame a lot. Let's see here. 2007 Domer. Hey, Brian, what are your thoughts on the 2023 QB recruiting strategy? If we're in good shape with more, are we being too aggressive with handing out other offers? No, I actually think they're handling this well. Look, Dante Moore knows where Notre Dame stands. They know why they're offering other kids, and they know he's their number one guy. I think Notre Dame is balancing this just right. And what I mean by that is this. They know that Dante Moore is going to be a tough get. They also know they have a shot. So they're putting the full court press on Dante. He knows where they stand with him. He knows that he's their top guy. Okay. But they also can't put all their chips in the Dante Moore basket and then he goes somewhere else. And then they've missed out on all these other players that they then got to try to flip somebody or turn to somebody who's not going to be a top player. So I think they're handling this strategy well. Those players know they can't commit right now. If Jackson Arnold wanted to call Notre Dame tomorrow and commit, I don't believe he'd be allowed to do so. They know that. Dante Moore knows that. And also some of these guys they're offering are guys that are not in any hurry to commit. Avery Johnson, for example, is in no hurry to commit right now, which is perfect for Notre Dame. That's right up their alley. Same thing with Jackson Arnold. So, and then if one of these guys goes out as a senior or junior and just blows up and you're like, wow, this guy's every bit as good as Dante Moore, I don't see happening. Then now you're in position to where you can close on him if that happens. So I actually like what they're doing. I think the balance of making sure you're on all over your top guy and he knows where you stand with also making sure you have a board in place in case he doesn't pick you is important. But I do believe if Notre Dame felt that Dante Moore was going to decide soon, and this is why his recruitment is a little bit different than Malachi Nelson's. So USC got in a little bit of trouble with Malachi Nelson's camp, allegedly. And this is, coming from stuff I've read. I never talked to Malachi's family or Malachi about anything, much less this. But they had to kind of smooth over some things with Malachi because they had made another quarterback offer in 2023. And apparently the story goes is that kind of upset Malachi and them. Well, to me, number one, there wasn't communication beforehand. They didn't explain to him beforehand why they were going to offer other quarterbacks because at the time he was leaning towards Oklahoma. And so they had to protect themselves. Well, they didn't communicate that beforehand. Notre Dame isn't making that mistake with this class, from what I understand. Number two, that was a different situation as well because Malachi was always going to decide really early. At least for a while, they knew he was going to commit early. If Dante Moore was committing this summer, then I'd say you shouldn't be recruiting really any other quarterbacks, at least not publicly. You should be all in on the Dante Moore train. Well, that's not the case with Dante. Dante's not going to commit anytime soon. At least that's what he has said. And so you have to protect yourself because if you let this thing carry out into next summer and all of a sudden he picks someone else, you're in trouble because you missed out on all these other kids. Whereas with some of these kids, if they really like you, you can convince them to let their recruitments play out a little bit. Hey, look, don't rush into a decision. Here's the case, and that's where they'll be. So I actually really like what they're doing with quarterback recruiting. I was critical of the way that they handled 2022 quarterback recruiting. I really like the way that they're handling 2023 quarterback recruiting. Jack, I appreciate this. IB Nation is the best. Yes, it is. Love all of y'all. This has been a lot of fun. Paul says, if Amorian Walker flakes, do you see Notre Dame sticking with just adding one more receiver, or do you see a scenario where they maybe go after Bradshaw and Everhart or someone else? I think in that scenario, they'd probably only just add one of those two, unless those two both have big-time years. I think they would just go with the three they have and maybe use that extra one for next year. Or it would increase the odds that they take a running back. I think that ultimately is what it would do. I don't think they would take both of those guys. That's my opinion. I think it would result in either pushing it to 2023 or maybe now you have room for an additional running back. Michael Campbell, off subject. Have you tracked recruiting class rankings and seen who's behind the scenes dropping players who are 5 stars until they commit to Notre Dame? It's not important to you, but it is nationally for us. I mean, that's why I did the whole show, Michael. But again, you can say it's important, but I'm just trying to help you understand what really matters when it comes to being successful as a football program. But have you tracked recruiting class rankings and seen who's behind the scenes dropping players who are 5 stars until they commit? I don't quite understand the question. I don't know anyone that's dropping 5-star players until they commit to Notre Dame. I'm not quite sure what you mean by that. Could you just elaborate on what you mean by that? Are you talking about like recruiting ranking services? I'm just not quite sure what you mean by that. Brent Byers, IB Nation is most definitely the best place on the planet for Notre Dame football discussions. Thank you for that, Brent. I appreciate that very much. Notre Dame 2164. I was rewatching some games from this past season, and Kyle Hamilton is a mutant. How does Nwankpa compare when it comes to skill set? They're a little different. I think Xavier is. I think Kyle's more rangy. I think Xavier's better in the alley than Kyle was at the same age, although that's become a strength of Kyle. What's impressed me the most about Kyle Hamilton, and it really happened from the moment he got to Notre Dame, was he was a much better hitter and tackler than I thought he would be. It's just not something we saw a ton of him in high school because he was just so much in coverage and zone and playing receiver, but he's a much better hitter. But as a high school player, I think Xavier's a better tackler. I think Xavier's a better alley player. Kyle has more range, I think. But Kyle's just such a unicorn. He really is. But where I think they compare, however, and this is to your question, is they compare because I think they're players that play the game a similar way. All around good players, instinctive players. Yes, they're really good athletes, but there's really good athletes who are not good football players because they don't have the IQ, the intelligence to be great football players. Kyle does. Xavier does. That's the difference between, certain players. Like I've made this comment about Ian Book. I've never thought that Ian Book's issues were as physical as much as they just were just how he processed information wasn't as quick as other guys. And it's the same thing with safeties and offensive linemen and every other position. And I think the thing about Xavier is he's a really heady football player. And That's something that makes Kyle special. Kyle's not a 4.3 athlete. He's fast, but he's not a 4.3 athlete. He's explosive, but he's not a 4.3 athlete. Kyle plays fast because he's a good, really, really good athlete, explosive athlete, even though he's not necessarily a burner, at least he hasn't shown it yet. And that's not what, when I talk to sources, I don't hear, he's running a 4.3. He's fast, but he's not like that kind of fast. But he just plays fast because he's so smart and he knows he can read things and sniff things out. And I think Xavier's very similar in that regard. So I think how they're used on the football field is very similar, but they're different players. And I would never want to compare Xavier to Kyle because Kyle's got a chance to be the one of the first top 5 safety draft pick in a very long time. So top 4 safety draft pick in a very, very long time, according to a lot of people are saying. And that just would be unfair to really put anyone up to that level. All right, let's get to some more questions here. All right, got bumped a little bit. Okay, AJ, we got you here. So let me get to this one from AJ. AJ says, number 1, Brian, I know you're a Steve Sarkisian fan and everyone seems to be sold on him at Texas. Obviously, he is a fantastic OC, but as a head coach, his highest winning total at UW was 8 wins, and his stint at USC was short-lived. So let's go to part 2, and controversial. Am I missing something here that I am not sold on him? No, I don't. I don't think you're missing anything. I think whether or not he's going to be a great head coach is still to be determined, AJ. My thing with Steve Sarkisian, when I praise him and I think he's awesome, is as an offensive mind. I think he's a great offensive mind. I don't know if I've ever said, hey, I hope he's the next head coach in Notre Dame. I think he did a good job at Washington. I think you have to remember too, a lot of times it's not just about your overall record, but what are you stepping into? I mean, Steve Sarkisian went 5-7, 7-6, 7-6, 7-6, 8-4, as you mentioned, during his tenure at Washington. But let's not forget what happened in that last team won 9 games. He left after 8 wins. He took over a team that was 0-12. He took over a Tyrone Willingham program. And as we've seen in the past, taking over for a Ty Willingham program often leaves you really devoid of talent. I think that's something that really, really hurt that program is, again, who he was replacing. He did not step into a situation where there was a lot of talent. I mean, the 4 years before he took over, Washington went 2-9, 5-7, 4-9, and 0-12. That's what he walked into. In the 4 years before Steve Sarkisian took over, Washington had combined six Pac-12 victories, right? He won in 5 years, won 24. In 5 years compared to 6 in 4 years, right? So it's not just about the record, it's the context of what did he step into. And then you look at USC, 2014, I think this was a pretty good USC team. 2015 was an interesting thing, but look, he made some really bad personal decisions. I think he still has a lot to prove when it comes to his ability to put together a coaching staff and win as big as a head coach. He hasn't proven that. And there's no doubt about that. And you haven't heard me say a thing this offseason about, hey, I think they're going to go out and win the national championship. I think that they're going to be a powerhouse. I've never said any of those kind of things. What I have said is that I think that he is someone who is one of the best offensive minds in the game. And I don't think that is a question. Now, I think also he's evolved over time too. But I mean, even you go look at him as a quarterback's coach, and he's had a great reputation. That's why the Raiders tried to hire him as their head coach when he had never been a coordinator before. So I think he's a great offensive mind. Whether or not he is going to be a great head coach, it remains to be seen. It really does. And I think the jump to the SEC just made his job a whole lot harder. So I hope that help clears up my opinion. I think Steve Sarkisian is a phenomenal offensive mind. I don't know if I've ever argued that he's a guaranteed proven winner. I do think it made sense for Texas to hire him because you look at the market and you say, I'm taking a chance on him, someone who has head coaching experience and is a great offensive mind in an era where offensive production is important. As long as you feel that the personal off the field stuff is figured out. And again, he had some drinking issues, which that's not a great thing and a scary thing, but also something that all the times isn't always something that I do think there's times people just make bad choices with alcohol. And I think there's other times where, alcohol has consumed you to the point where, you need to get help. And once you get that help, it's something that you can get past. And hopefully he has. Uh, but yeah, those are question marks. Those are concerns in that regards. But I just think he's a brilliant offensive mind. And if I were going to sit down and talk ball with anybody, he's one of 5 coaches in the business, and I'm talking NFL, college, high school, at all levels. He's one of 5 guys I would love to just sit down and just talk football with. I mean, and that's where I'm coming from. Does that mean he's going to be a great head coach? I don't know. We'll have to see. Let's get to some more questions. We got a super chat down here. Let's get to that. Hopefully I don't get bumped down too far. Let's see here. Where's that super chat go? B Place. Thank you so much for the super chat, buddy. I appreciate it very much. Love your avatar, by the way. Says, I feel that some Notre Dame fans aren't understanding the magnitude of having a Jack Cohn transfer to Notre Dame in a year like this one. In my opinion, the season looks different with a young QB battle of Drew Pine and Tyler Buckner. Am I wrong? No, I don't think you're wrong. I mean, I've said this all summer. I think Notre Dame would be good no matter who the quarterback was. I have confidence in all the quarterbacks. I do feel, however, that Jack Cohn is the best option to help this team compete for a championship this year. I do. I think he's a better quarterback than people realize. Again, I'm putting a lot. I mean, I'm putting a lot of my reputation on Jack Cohn, and I don't have a problem doing that. I mean, it's part of my job, but I'm kind of beating this drum pretty loudly and have been for months. If Jack Cohn's a mediocre quarterback this year, it's going to make me look like you made some bad evaluations. But that's how confident I am of him as a player. It really is. I think the system, the players around him, the where Notre Dame is in a year where other top programs are down a bit because they've had some major personnel losses. I think that if Jack Cohn's as good as I think he is, this is going to be a huge pickup. Now, if he's not as good as I think he is, then it's just going to be a good bridge to build between the next 2 young cornerbacks. But if they're thrust into the lineup, I think they'll handle themselves fine. But I think Jack Cohn maximizes the potential of this offensive football team, and that's the key to competing for a title. So I got bumped down quite a bit, just so you all know. So there were some questions between AJ's question and this next question from AJ. If you had a question in there, please repeat it to me because I lost it when we got bumped down. I was on a roll so far, but when I went and grabbed B Place's super chat, I got booted. So I do apologize about that. I'm not purposely skipping anyone's questions. But AJ says, I am also a fan of all college football. Live in Michigan, so I follow Michigan State and Michigan closely as well. I know a lot about their teams. My Michigan State and Michigan friends know barely anything about Notre Dame, kind of annoying. And you're going to find that a lot. And that's kind of not as much fun. I like to be able to talk football. And I think having an understanding of who other teams are helps you understand where your team is and how far they have to go or don't go. So, yeah, Tommy Gunn says, can we just sell the whole state of Michigan to Canada, please? I'm all for that as long as we can wait until after Nolan Ziegler and Josh Burnham sign with Notre Dame. I think that's a very important part of it. Christopher Sally, it's a good question. Notre Dame usually recruits the New Jersey parochial schools of Bergen Catholic, St. Joe's, St. Peter's Prep. I would add Mater Dei, who Clarence Lewis came from. Who's the last recruit they got from a top New Jersey public school like Irvington? That's a good question, Christopher, and I don't know the answer. I'm going to go look that up when the show's over. So maybe tomorrow when we talk during the Q&A, you can ask that one because I'm trying to think because I'm just thinking of all the Jersey guys. Quentin Nelson was from a Catholic school, right? All the Adamiolas and Wimbush and Simon and all those guys were from there. So I'd have to go through and look at it. I honestly don't know if I know the answer to that one. It's a good question. Patrick McGrain says, have you ever had a high school coach turn you off of one of their players you were recruiting? Sort of, but not really. So I had a high school coach that I didn't get along with very well my senior year. So my junior high school, we went to state semifinals, and my head coach got hired at University Christian down in Jacksonville, Florida, to be the defensive coordinator for his dad, who got hired as the head coach. His dad was the head coach at Providence Day in Charlotte the year before. And so I transferred down there in the spring, and I was going to play in Florida my senior year. And in the summer, I got my petition to play down there got rejected because I was moving down there by myself. I was 18 years old, but they still wouldn't let me do it because I wasn't living with a parent. And so I had to come back to Virginia. Well, the new head coach didn't like me, didn't like the previous coach, and so we butted heads a lot. And we were not very good my senior year because of him. So, like, I'll give you an example. I always like to share this story because his guy was such a bad coach. So we're first game of the year. We're playing at Riverdale Baptist up in Maryland, and we're down 20-0. And we're just off tackle right, off tackle left. We're like in 12. We were in 22 personnel for a chunk of that game. And we had a really fast receiver, and we had a running back that could really catch the ball. And the whole first half, me and the receiver are like, can we just throw fades? Like, they're playing one-on-one. They can't run with him. And so the coach like yelled at us, like, I'm the coach. I make the calls. And I was like, well, then just call a fade. So he finally relents. I drop back. I throw a 75-yard touchdown pass. I mean, it's just I threw the ball 25 yards. That's it. But the guy smoked him off the line. Eric catches it, runs it for a touchdown. So we're down 20-7. We get the ball a couple drives later, and I audible to a fullback trap. And Chucky gets it, runs for like a 25-yard touchdown. Coach was pissed. You don't know, because I wasn't allowed to audible. So I audibled, and he didn't like it. Well, and we ended up losing. I didn't throw another pass the rest of the game. We lost by a touchdown. So we come out the next game. We're playing our arch rival, Norfolk Academy, and first drive of the game, it's just I'm running option, and I'm pitching, I'm running, drop back, throw a fade, touchdown, 7-0. And we had never beaten this team in football. Next drive, I checked to a fullback trap again because, again, they knew we were running option, so they had split. So I checked to a fullback trap. Chucky takes it, runs at 75 yards for a touchdown. We're up 14-0. I threw 2 passes the rest of the game. He was so pissed at me that I checked that play that he wouldn't let me throw it, we wouldn't do anything more. So we lost, got killed, never scored another touchdown. And so he and I didn't like each other a whole lot. So then he gets mad at me, moves me to receiver. And my first, one of the first full games. So we had a young sophomore quarterback, and he would make calls. I'd grab this is so bad. I shouldn't be telling you this. I'd grab the quarterback in the huddle. I'd say, John, throw me the ball. He's like, what's supposed to go to Joey? I said, throw me the ball. So we got that next game. He's just throwing me the ball whenever I tell him to. I score 5 touchdowns, and the coach is pissed. He nominates the quarterback for the player of the week. And I ended up getting co-player of the week, but he didn't nominate me. It's like, so we didn't see eye to eye. And he did a lot of things to sabotage my recruitment. You know, I found out that he was not giving me letters. Teams were calling, and he would give them, say bad things about me. And it got to the point where the AD had to step in and say, you're not allowed to talk to coaches anymore. And so when coaches would call my school, they'd have to talk to the baseball coach. Well, you're not going to get recruited that way. And so that's why a lot of the only schools that really were recruiting me they had some HBCUs were recruiting me because there were some, I won't get into that. But anyway, so I always kind of had that in the back of my mind as to, just because the high school coach is telling you something doesn't mean that's how a kid is. So I would try to talk to other people if that would happen. If a head coach was telling me something about a kid, I wouldn't necessarily take it as gospel. I'd try to do my own research because I know sometimes coaches have egos and coaches make bad decisions, and sometimes there's just bad coaches. I mean, look at NFL, college, every level of college and high school, there's great coaches at every level. There really are. There's some high school coaches that are phenomenal coaches. They just choose to coach in high school. There's some college D1 coaches who are terrible. There's some high school coaches who are terrible. I think there's a greater percentage of terrible coaches at the Division III and then the high school level just by nature. But there's a lot of bad coaches there. And so I would try not to take their word as gospel unless it was a coach I knew. If it was a coach that I had a relationship with, that I knew he was going to shoot me straight, that would be different. But if it was a coach that I hadn't dealt with a ton, he wouldn't alone cause me to do that because of my own personal experience. So it's a little bit of a different situation. But it's a really fun question, not really having to do with Notre Dame football, but I kind of like that sometimes. Brent Byer, saw Jack Cohn hit Lindsey on a deep ball. That was pretty. One of the first articles I wrote at Irish Breakdown, Brent, and I don't know if you read this because I don't think you were part of the channel yet because we hadn't really started our YouTube channel really yet. But I wrote an article about how Jack Cohn is going to allow Notre Dame to have a better deep passing game. The Notre Dame deep ball is going to improve with Jack Cohn at quarterback. And statistically, and then watching game film, I believe that to be true. So you should check that out. Find that article, Jack Cohn, deep ball, Notre Dame. If you do a Google search, you'll be able to find that. But I think he's going to really improve Notre Dame's deep ball. He's got a better arm than people think, but it's more about just the timing, the guts, and the accuracy, the willingness to throw the ball downfield that is going to help them a lot. Ladarius Martin says, are y'all still in play for Zach Rice? And was Walter Nolan once a Notre Dame target? Yes, they are still in play for Zach Rice. No, Notre Dame was never in on Walter Nolan. He was never a Notre Dame target. Jonathan says, Coach, how have you never heard the acronym FOMO? You're getting old, dude. You're not wrong, Jonathan. I know you're just playing, but I guess it's because FOMO, it's like fear of missing out is like it's like 4 words. That's 5 syllables. I mean, you're not really saving a whole lot of time by saying FOMO. So fear of missing out. I mean, just okay. So no, I've never heard that, but yes, I am getting old. There's no question. There's more and more things that are talked about and said. I think Omar was asking me something about, I don't know, maybe it's like a music thing. And I'm like, I don't have a clue what he's talking about. So yes, I'm definitely getting old. Definitely getting old. Let's see here. Casey Dunaway says Notre Dame recruiting class will be determined on how the season goes. I'm thinking 10-2 losses to Cincinnati and North Carolina. I'd be shocked if Notre Dame lost those 2 games, both of them. Like, I mean, maybe losing one, but I don't think they'll lose both of them. You know, Notre Dame hasn't lost a home game since, 2017. That was to Georgia, the number 2 team in the country. I don't see this team losing 2. I don't. But I do think there's some merit to the season will determine their success. If Notre Dame goes 8-4, they're not going to finish strong, right? If they're 10-2, they'll have a shot to finish strong. And if they're better than that, then they'll definitely finish strong. So I definitely think there's some merit to that. I don't necessarily agree with the 2 that they would lose to. Could I see them being 10-2? Yeah. I think that's the floor for what this team could be is 10-2, but hopefully they're a little bit better than that. But I'd be surprised if both of their losses were at home. I really, really would. We did have a super chat. I did not see this earlier from Andrew Vandenover. I'm sorry for not getting this earlier, Andrew. I just did not see it. And I don't have Vince with me today to help me find those things. But how much could boards change with high school football opening up this season across the country compared to last season? Andrew, I think it could impact it a lot. I don't know if it will, because there's still there's going to be some difficulty getting out to games. Some states still have very strict travel policy. Some states have, it could still be challenging, but I do think we're going to see some names pop up, maybe for Notre Dame, maybe not, but I definitely think around the country, we're going to see some kid that's a 3-star that nobody's ever heard of just kind of come out of nowhere and be an offer. I mean, 2 months before, when we were going into the summer, had anyone really ever heard of Ashton Craig? I had never really heard of him before until a friend of mine reached out and said, hey, you got to watch this kid, Ashton Craig. I'd never seen the kid play. I think we're going to see a lot of that this season. I'm sorry, my beard is a little itchy today. But yeah, Andrew, I think we could see a lot of that this year. Will it be like Notre Dame caliber players or not? That's a good question. I'm not sure if I know the answer to that one, but I think we're going to see a lot of it around college football. I really do. I really do. The Fifth Horseman. Anyone remember the good old days of Ty Willingham and Bob Davies? How time has played in our favor. Yeah. I mean, look, and that's a lot of that goes to Brian. I mean, all that goes to Brian Kelly and Jack Swarbrick for the changes they've made around the program. It really has been fun. Bang 1801. Do you think the coaches poll is better than the AP poll? I don't think preseason polls matter, but I always trust coaches' thoughts on a team more than many others. Well, the thing you have to understand about the coaches poll is not all coaches actually vote in the coaches poll. A lot of places it's the SID will put it together. Somebody like that will put it together. I also think that a lot of coaches will do things that are going to be an advantage to them. So you'll see some coaches will put like Notre Dame way down or another school way down, or their top 10 is littered with teams from their conference. The coaches poll is not one that I put a lot of stock in. I don't put a ton of stock in the AP poll either, but I think most AP writers at least try to get it right. I don't think they, no one gets it right all the time, but I think there's less shenanigans, I guess is the right word to use. So I'm going to just go ahead and just make, Jonathan's already called me old, so I might as well just roll with it, right? But so I'll use the word shenanigans. So yeah, I think that the AP poll is probably the one I put a little bit more stock in than the coaches poll, but it's not by much. I think they're both good polls. I don't hate the polls. I think some of the writers do a bad job, but I think the majority of the AP writers try to get it right. And I don't always agree with them. They wouldn't always agree with me, but I think they try to get it right. Whereas I think some of the coaches either don't care, have somebody else do it, or if they're doing it themselves, some of them are going to, there's going to be some gamesmanship involved. Patrick Hoyle, Brian, we go back to the ISD days. It's a long time. I think many remaining top recruits will commit once they see ND clicking on the field this year. Example, O'Leary's in safety. Keep grinding, brother. Appreciate you, Patrick, very, very much. Yeah, you're going back a long time, the old ISD days. So I appreciate you being part of what we're doing here very, very much. But yeah, I think so. I think that there's some defensive players, especially, that really want to see this product that Marcus Freeman's going to put on the field. I think the Notre Dame safeties come out, and I'm not even talking about Kyle Hamilton. I'm actually talking about Houston Griffith and DJ Brown and KJ Wallace and those guys. If those guys are playing well, I think that's going to have a big impact on Xavier Nwangwu. I really do. Because that's the big difference right now between Notre Dame and Ohio State, right? I mean, the big difference is Ohio State's battling for the DBU moniker. Notre Dame hasn't had a first-round NFL draft pick at safety since, 2012? And then before that, it was how much longer before that? I mean, you have to go back to the Jeff Burris, days. So, yeah, I think that's going to be a big part of it. I think that's a very good observation, Patrick, that if they can put a really good product on the field, it's going to have an impact on how they finish. I think for the offense, because the offense is kind of pretty much done for the most part, I think where the offense success is going to have an even bigger impact on remaining recruits is more so on the 2023 kids, so like the Dante Moores, the Carnell Tates, guys like that. I think that could have a big impact on 2023, but I think this year's defensive success is going to have a big impact on how well they finish when I'm looking at Anthony Lucas and Xavier Nwangwu on that one. Yeah, Brent Byer says, anyone bought tickets from Stephanie Sims on the IB Facebook group? Seems sketchy. It's a new Facebook account. She wants money. Then she would transfer the tickets via email. Do not do that. I was traveling most of the day yesterday after the show. I got out of here, so I removed her from our group last night, or at least from the forum. So that should not be up there. But no, please don't do that. And if you want to sell tickets on the IB Facebook page or the message board or anything else, just contact me first. Just run it through me first so I can make sure I vet you, and then we can get you out there and all that. And if you're also looking to sell tickets, talk to me too, because I'm going to be buying tickets to all games this year, or accepting free tickets if anyone's trying to give some away, since I won't be in the press box this year. Let's see here. But yeah, do not do that, Brent. I appreciate you bringing that up. No question. Okay, this is an interesting. So we have Ladarius. We have an Auburn fan in the house. Auburn will out recruit Notre Dame in 2023. Brown will end up at Auburn. Oh, okay. OC Irish fan, Coach D, you're a good man. Charlie Brown, catering to your grandmother. Grandmas are a special class of people, and mine especially. And look, she's 89. She had COVID a couple months ago, so she was sick. She was only in the hospital for like a couple of days. She's a tough lady. She actually didn't go in. She had already had it for like over a week, and we kept convincing her to go to the hospital. She's like, "Nah, I'm good." She's just that kind of grandma, right? But ever since she's been better, I mean, we don't get to spend time with her, so this is the second time this summer I go pick her up. She comes and hangs out. We were going to go to the South Bend Cubs game on Friday night, but it was raining and stuff. So we just hang out with her and enjoyed spending time with her. But, obviously she had a big hand in raising me as a kid. And I have a ton of fond memories of my grandma. I mean, when I was in college, they lived in Ohio. I played college football in Maryland and North Carolina, and they would come down and stay with my parents during the fall so they could go to all my games, came to watch me play in high school. I mean, she would go watch me coach, right? I mean, games I was coaching, she would come for games. I mean, I've got pictures of when I was at Duquesne where they would be there in their Duquesne gear. So, my grandma's, she's pretty amazing. And we lost my grandpa back in 2013. He was 91 at the time. She's 89 now, but it's funny, man. She's still, she has to use like a walker now. She does not like it. She's finally getting used to it, but she doesn't like it. But no, I appreciate y'all being understanding of the time I spent with her. But I love my grandma. I love spending time with her. And, once football season starts, it's a lot harder. So I wanted to get some more time with her. And so I appreciate that. Appreciate that very much. Pac-Man 352, are y'all worried about losing to Florida State? I mean, I'm not worried about losing to Florida State if Notre Dame plays their game. I think Notre Dame's a better football team than Florida State significantly. The last couple of times they've played, they haven't been overly competitive games. I think I'd be a little bit more worried about it if it was later in the year when Florida State got a little bit more experience under their belt with the new quarterback, if he is the guy, or with some of the younger players. They're going to play a lot of young guys this year. So, no, I'm not worried about losing it. Could Notre Dame lose that game if they go out there and turn the ball over a ton? Sure. But I'm assuming I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt that you're asking a serious question. And no, I'm not overly concerned about it. The only way Florida State beats Notre Dame is if Notre Dame beats themselves, in my opinion. So let's go. I got another super chat down here from Andrew Rhodes. $5 towards the Coach D ticket fund. I appreciate that, Andrew. I appreciate that very, very much. Oh, that's good. Let's see here. Ronnie T'Challa says, really appreciate you, Coach. Thank you, Ronnie. Especially on days that aren't as good as others. Being able to listen to anything about Notre Dame makes things better. Can't do a game, but would like to come up and meet everyone. I would love that, Ronnie. And I know for those of you who don't know, right now Ronnie is obviously going through chemo. He's battling cancer again, and we are praying that he gets another victory over that. So keep battling, buddy, and we appreciate that that we can make the time go by a little bit better. So that'll be good, buddy. So hopefully you get a chance to come up here, and we'll all get a chance to sit down with you and meet you and enjoy all those type of things. So let's get through this. Paul says Jack Cohn is probably going to end up being the most effective quarterback Brian Kelly's had at Notre Dame. Deeper set of skill players, and every chance the defense is better. Stop drinking the ESPN Kool-Aid. I think there's a chance for that. I mean, look, if over the course of the season, I still think the most effective quarterback Notre Dame had was Malik Zaire. The problem is he only played 3 games. He was really good in those 3 games, though. But I mean, I think, boy, this is who has been the most effective quarterback at Notre Dame. I think Everett Golson needs to be in that conversation for all his issues. I mean, Notre Dame went 12-1 in one year when he was a starter, and 8-5 in another. Deshaun Kaiser had a really good first year, but then they went 4-8 the next year with him as the quarterback. Ian Book won a lot of games, but how many games would some of these other quarterbacks have won if they had the kind of defense and offensive line and things that Notre Dame's had the last few years? How good would the 2015 season have been with a better defense, for example, with Deshaun Kaiser there? So yeah, that's a good observation. I mean, good question. I'd be curious to see who that is, but I could see Jack Cohn being the best quarterback that Notre Dame has had under Brian Kelly for a season. No question. Hopefully he does. Notre Dame needs him to be. There's no question about it. Notre Dame absolutely needs him to be. All right. Here we go. Let's see here. Dropping Dime says, where's Vince? So they start school this week. And so the first week back at school, a lot of meetings, a lot of things getting figured out. So Vince couldn't be on part of the show today, and I don't think he's going to be part of the show tomorrow. But we'll get him back here soon enough. Don't worry. But yeah, this is the first week back at school. So, and Pac-Man is gone. So, look, we always appreciate fans from other schools coming here, but don't act like a clown. All right, you come here, don't act like a clown. And please, I'm going to say it again. When people come in here trolling, don't fall for it. Don't argue with them. Don't do the back. Just ignore them. And eventually I'll see it and I'll boot them out. But I just lost some good questions because there's like 30 responses to this troll coming into the chat. Don't respond to them. Okay. At first you respond to him. I answered the guy's question. He asked a question. Fine. But then when you realize he's a troll, just ignore him. Okay. Just ignore him. It makes it easier. Okay. Just get a life, some of these people, I swear. That's why I love like the Ladarius. You know, he's adamant. I'm an Alabama fan, but he's gonna come in here, he's gonna be respectful. We love it. And we've had a lot of Florida State fans come into the channel this summer and super cool and respectful. And most fans are that way. We've had a couple that aren't, but you know, we'll deal with those. Kenny Moore says Phil Steele is incredibly high on Cone, thinks he could be a sleeper for the Heisman. You know, we've actually had some conversations about that. We talked about that recently on our channel, Kenny. You know, in the traditional sense, would I have him as a Heisman contender? No, because when I think Heisman contender, I think, you know, big, you know, future top pick and throw for 1,000,000 yards. But, you know, as far as winning and production, I could see Jack Cone, if Notre Dame keeps winning, I could see Jack Cone in that conversation. No question about it. No question about it. And then Jay Wiki Jr. asked, how big of a leash do you think Cone gets this year? Well, I think he's going to get a pretty long one. I think he's clearly the guy, no question about it. And I don't think it's a deal where, you know, hey, he has a bad game and he's gone. I don't think it's going to be that. They could even lose the game, and I don't think it's a deal where he's going to necessarily get booted. So, you know, I think that's where it's at. Ladarius, our resident Alabama fan, said Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State, and Notre Dame will make the playoffs this year. Florida State won't be there, and he's right about at least one of those things. Florida State will not be there. Triple Deck PO says, where did Olmstead come from? He was from a private school. He went to one of the St. Joe's, I believe. Let me. You're talking about John Olmstead. So he was. He went to one of the St. Joe's, I believe. So let me look that up here. He was from St. Joseph's, and yep, he was from one of the St. Joe's. Yep. So yeah, I'm gonna. Yeah, so Triple Deck, you're thinking about this too. I've been trying to think about who would have been the last New Jersey guy that was a public school guy. Was it Rashad Kinlaw? Was he from New Jersey? Rashad Kinlaw? Did he go to a let me look that up. Is he from a public school in New Jersey? I'm gonna look him up in 2013. Yeah, Absegami. Is that a public school? People familiar with New Jersey? I think that's a public school, right? He's from Galloway, New Jersey, Absegami. So maybe I think Rashad Kinlaw might be the most recent one. So yeah, there you go. Let's get down here. So we got any more questions before we get out of here and get to what's next? Joseph Salvatore. Hey, Brian, thanks for the show. You're welcome. Do you know if Notre Dame is still pursuing DJ Wesolak, especially because we don't have a GU in the class? And if not, why not? I don't know that for sure. I've had people claim that. I know Notre Dame has had some conversations with him. I don't know if I would say it's a full-blown pursuit. It would make sense for them to pursue him as sort of a backup option if they don't think they're going to get Anthony Lucas or Cyrus Moss. I think there'd be some merit to that. I think the issue that I would have is same one I had before. I just don't know if he's a Viper. And I don't think he has the ceiling of Darren Agu. He's a good football player, but I don't think he has the same ceiling as those guys. Honestly, I think part of this too with DJ is going to have to depend on how you feel about your current depth chart. If there's some injuries, if there's some personnel losses of guys that you expect to be on the team, you may have to get a third end no matter what. And then DJ'd be a good one to have. He's a good football player. It's just, I don't know if you're going to bring him in, then Anthony Lucas, you're still going to bring in Anthony Lucas, but I just don't know how the numbers are going to be. But if they think they're going to have a personnel loss, go for him. He's just, he'll be ranked higher than Darren Agu. If we're talking about like this whole show is about recruiting rankings and where Notre Dame's going to be ranked, DJ Wesolak's going to do more for you than Darren Agu would have. I'm not saying he's a better prospect because I don't think that he was, but he would do more. He would do more for you. So let's see here. Okay, John Keever says, assuming we continue this success with recruitment, how far away is Notre Dame with not just competing with perennial top 10 programs, but beating the top 3 and placing Notre Dame as a top 4? I don't think they're far off at all. I think they're a couple positions away. I think they've got to get better at quarterback. They've got to get better at cornerback. I think those are the two big areas. I think that the receiver position was not there in 2020 as far as being on that level, but in past years it has been. 19, 18, 15. They've had years where the receiving core has been as good as, could be as good as almost anybody. Certainly good enough to compete for a title. Last year it was not because of the injuries, Lindsey and Austin and some other things. But obviously that's back-to-back great classes. But to me, really, John, the big thing is quarterback. I think that's the big okay, let me ask you this. I'm going to ask this question. I want people to think about this. You take the 2017 Notre Dame football team, 2017 team. Think about how good that team was. You put Lamar Jackson, who was in college that year at Louisville. You put Lamar Jackson on that 2017 football season. Who beats Notre Dame? I don't think anybody does. You put Lamar Jackson behind that offensive line with Josh Adams and Dexter Williams and Alizé Mack and Equanimous St. Brown and the guys that they had on that football team with the defense they had that year, which was not great, but pretty good. This is a team that lost to Georgia by 1. This is a team that smacked people until they just collapsed against Miami. They don't collapse against Miami with Lamar Jackson. Right? That's one player. Right? One player. What happens in 2018 if you switch quarterbacks? Give Clemson Ian Book, give Notre Dame Trevor Lawrence, right? It's the talent. The roster's not the issue at almost everywhere. They got to get better play at quarterback. To me, it's that simple. Now, are there some other areas you got to improve to make the margin for error wider? Sure. Corners one. Receiver, consistently recruiting receiver. Developing receiver. D-line, linebacker, offensive line, running back, tight end. I think those positions are there. I think safeties had some up and down years recently. That's got to get better too. But I think they're close. I really do. I think this class, if they get Nwankpa and Lucas, could be that, where the gap is super tight. And then 2023 is the one that puts it over the edge. I think they're that close. Now, they just got to finish now. And that was kind of the point of what we talked about here. Sid Irish says, Coach D, do you see us having a better shot at Lucas or Canoe? I'd say right now I'd probably say Canoe just because I think he's a little bit more – if I had to bet on one of them, I'd probably go with him, but I think they've got a shot with both of those guys. I really do. Mike S. asked a question that kind of fit what we're just talking about. He says, is getting an elite quarterback the only thing holding Notre Dame back from a national championship? No, it's not the only thing. It's a big part of it, though. It really is. No question about it. Michael Campbell says, I think there's a misconception on Jack Cohn's ability to run. If you look at Wisconsin's games, he knows when to do it, and he's not slow. When you have Jonathan Taylor, I don't think he was asked to. I think there's some good observations there, Michael. Remember, Jack Cohn was committed to Notre Dame to play lacrosse, so he's a good at. He's not going to run like Ian Book. There are some times he did run at Wisconsin. He had a 24-yard touchdown run against Michigan, where he just, how Michigan's really unsound defensively under Don Brown, but just seas parted and he just took off and ran for 24 yards. The other thing too is he did a lot from under center, and it is a lot harder to drop back and then run other than scrambles in that kind of offense. So the offense held him back as well. It was in a shotgun. I think we'll see Jack Cohn, get outside on bootlegs and just tuck it and run for 7, 8, 9, 10 yards. If they're going to drop 8 into coverage, 7, 8 into coverage, and a rush lane opens up, you can see Jack Cohn take off and move the chains. He's not going to do some of the things that Ian Book did. That's not his game. But to me, the athleticism stands out too, is avoiding the rush, sidestepping, stepping into the pocket, climbing the pocket, spinning out. Some of those things are athletic traits that are important, even more so than the running part. And I thought those play out more than necessarily running. I don't think they need a quarterback to run. If all he does as a runner is just move the chains, I can live with that. I want you to step in the pocket, slide step away from the pressure, step in or climb the pocket, any of those options, and hit the check down, hit the crosser, take the shot downfield, get the ball to your playmakers. Because, yes, he's a good athlete, he can run, But I'd still rather have Braden Lindsey have the ball in space, or Avery Davis, or Lawrence Keys, or Kyron Williams, or Chris Tyree, or Kevin Austin, or Xavier Watts, or Lorenzo. I mean, pick a guy. I'd still rather have those guys have the ball in space than Jack Cohn. And that's where I think Jack Cohn's going to add a lot of value. And sometimes being an athlete doesn't mean running. It means buying time to get a throw off. And I think that can be important as well. All right. I'm not sure how to take this one, but I just had to read this one from Chief Brody. Cohn will be better than what Jurkovec would have been had he stayed at Notre Dame. Cohn, I'm referring to, didn't have multiple years in the program to regress. Okay, so I thought you were going to go in a different direction with that at first, and I was about to argue with you, but when you landed it the way that you landed it, Chief, that was amazing. Very, very well done. Very well done. Mike S. says, are you surprised in the recruiting job that Tommy Rees is doing? Yeah, I am a little bit. I'll be honest, I am. It was not about the work ethic or the personality, but what resume does Tommy Rees have to sell, right? I mean, the offense averaged 33 points last year. He's been the quarterback's coach for a program that hasn't produced a really very good quarterback recently. And you look and say he's able to come into the mix and make the movement that he's made with recruits. I mean, you look at what he's done. I mean, look, give Coach Alexander credit, but Tommy Rees had a lot to do with that. Billy Schrouth is looking at Notre Dame right now and is not committed to Wisconsin. A lot of because of what Tommy Rees has done. So, yeah, I'll be honest with you. I'm surprised at how successful he's been this early. I thought he would have needed like a year to put up a big offense to really move the needle. He's already moving the needle. Now, if you can give him a 40-point per game offense to work to have behind him, I look forward to what he could do in next year's recruiting class if he can continue, because you know he's going to be hungry. You know that. There's no question. No question. Jake Fromm, I am not a Notre Dame fan, but I've come to respect them more the past few years. I appreciate that. I'm assuming you're a Georgia fan, so I appreciate you coming into the show and joining us. So no question about it. Jeff Perry, I'm going to date myself here. I long for the good old days of Era and Dan. My earliest memory is of the 1973 National Championship team. I was 7 years old. Yeah, I wish I could have experienced those times too. That's the era when my dad became a Notre Dame fan, was the Era Parsegian tenure. That's when my dad became a Notre Dame fan. Michael Campbell says, I believe Jack Cohn looks bigger and stronger than he was playing quarterback for Wisconsin, probably from rehabilitation from the injury. Anyone have this information? I think he's about the same size. He's about 5 pounds heavier. You know, it's probably filled out a little bit more, but that's just the natural progression of staying in a program and being in a program as good as Notre Dame. So, yeah, that's kind of where I would say about that one. Tommy Guns, Brian, how excited are you that you get to jump around and show excitement this season and don't have to hold it all in? So Tommy's talking about, if I'm at games this year, I'm going to be in the press box. No, I'm not going to be in the press box. I'm going to be at, probably buying tickets to be at games this year. And so, yeah, I don't know if I'll be doing cheering because I'm going to kind of be still trying to work. I'm not going to just be there as a fan. I still need to be able to evaluate things that, the birds. That's the only reason I'm going to these games. Otherwise, I would just stay. I really want to be able to evaluate the games the way that I evaluate games. And since I'm not going to be in the press box this year, going to games is really my option. But I'm still going to kind of be working. That doesn't mean I may not say and talk and cheer, but probably not, because I want to be able to still work and evaluate and see those types of things so I can still bring a great product to you all. Joe Stukenberg is in the chat today. Thank you very, very much. Gisette Iris says, I noticed Jaden Thomas looks like a big kid. He's about 6'1.5", 215. Pretty good looking kid. There's no doubt about that. No doubt about that. Andrew Sakalowski, Brian, I believe you in a previous show, you said to email you if you're already subscribed through SI but wanted to be part of the message board. Can you say that address again? Yes, it is Brian, Bryan, at irishbreakdown.com. So just shoot me an email and we'll get you all squared away. Let's see here. Let's get to some. I think that is going to be it for the questions. Let's see if we got a couple more here before we go. I want to make sure I get to everybody. 2007 Domer, thanks for the earlier answer about 2023 quarterback recruiting. Follow-up, it sounds like Johnson and Arnold have non-committable offers. Can you explain that? I never understood that concept. So basically what you're saying is there's types of offers, right? They're all scholarship offers, but sometimes you offer kids, hey, look, we want you right now. Let's do it. Other times you say, hey, look, we're still early in the process. We like you. We want to get you an offer so that you know that we're serious about you. We want a continuous relationship. We know that an offer is how we get into the game. But we're not in a position right now to really fill up your class. Or some coaches will be straight honest, like, hey, we like you a lot, but there's 2 guys ahead of you, and we're not making any movement with you and some others until we hear about those guys. Some coaches will flat out say that. But basically, the kid understands you have an offer, but it's not an offer that either of us are going to be making a move on yet. Right? And that's basically what a non-committable offer is. Hope that clears that up. Tommy Gunn, sending love to Ronnie, to Charla. Keep up that fight. Cancer treatments caused liver failure in my uncle, and he passed away a few weeks ago. Hope you kick its booty. Best wishes and good luck. Aloysius, am I saying that correctly? Winters, I'm a diehard Notre Dame fan living in Georgia Bulldog country. Dog fans tell me they would pull for the Russians if they played Notre Dame. I don't understand why they would say that. I think Notre Dame fans treated Georgia very, very well, other than just the typical SEC fans hate Notre Dame. But Ladarius is in the chat. He doesn't feel that way. But yeah, I'd say find some new Georgia fans to hang around, or find some ones that went to the game in 2017, because they came away with a completely different view of Notre Dame, most of them, from that game. Jonathan says, now that the 2022 class is just about wrapped up, when are you going to go deeper into 2023 film? I've already kind of started that. I'm going to have some articles coming out here in the next couple weeks as we get closer to the season, sort of just a top recruits list. I was breaking down some 2023 receiver film the other day. Going to start watching some O-line film coming up here. Obviously, I've watched a ton of quarterback film, but yeah, I'm going to start getting into a lot more of this. And not just the top guys. Like I've watched Deuce and Jackson Robinson and some of those guys, but really diving into the board more the next month or so is when I'll do that. And then Aloysius says, crazy thing is the Irish are picking up great players here in Georgia and SEC low country. Yeah, they are. Georgia's been great to Notre Dame in recent years. I mean, really great to Notre Dame. And I don't expect that to stop at all. They're doing very well there. Jack Maluli, late to join, might have answered. CJ committing seems to have taken care of public Notre Dame crystal balls. Any other 4 or 5-star silent commits? I know I'm putting you on the spot. Love the show, Coach. Actually, this time you're not putting me on the spot, Jack, because as far as I know, there are not any more public 2022 silent commitments. Any ones that were there, those kids have either committed or they're not silently committed anymore. And I think we all know who I'm talking about there. But yeah, all those other kids are already in the class now, and so that's where they are. So yeah, they're in a good place. But no more silent commitments that I'm aware of. Kenny Moore says, I think we are QB away. Land Dante Moore, and I will predict the title if we continue recruiting on the clip we have. Yeah, I think Tyler Buckner needs to be in that conversation, but you get Tyler Buckner 1 year, and then 2 years later you get Dante Moore, you're now recruiting at an elite level quarterback. There's no question about it. No question about it. This is a good question. Just what we're talking about. If Buckner's as good as we think, why do we need more? I think number one, because Buckner's, by the time Moore shows up, Buckner's going to be a junior. And so you want a quarterback that's going to have at least a year of development under system to take over. You don't want to start a freshman quarterback. Trevor Lawrence is the anomaly. So I think you need to recruit at least every other year another big time quarterback just to keep that pipeline going. The other part is what if Buckner gets hurt, right? What if he blows up and dominate? Let's say he wins the starting job in 22, dominates, has a great year, goes into 23, dominates. Well, then he's gone after that, right? And so then you go into the 2024 season with either a true freshman or do you want Dante Moore? I'd want Dante Moore, and I like the idea of having that year to groom. I think that's the way to go in most instances. Like I said, Trevor Lawrence is the anomaly, and he's not the rule, right? He's the exception. And so I want time to develop that. No question about it. No question about it. Irish Joe, another great show. Brian, carry on and God bless. I appreciate that, Joe, very, very much. Sid Irish says Notre Dame released captains yet. So Brian Kelly said he was going to name captains on Monday. It is now Tuesday, as far as I know. I'm going to check the Twitter page here real quick and Notre Dame's main page to see if that is true or not. Does not look like they've named captains yet. So we will hopefully find out here soon. But no, they said it was going to be Monday, so I don't know if the team knows already, and they just haven't released it to us. But as far as I know, they have not released the names of captains yet. So my guess would be that they're still waiting to hear back from. They're still waiting back to hear. They're still waiting to hear back from the advisory board, the faculty advisory board, which always signs off on captains. So that would be just my guess. But again, that's 100% my guess. That's not knowledge. Let's see here. I think that's going to do it. Here's one. I think we're going to end on this. I like this. I like this. Connor O'Doherty. Coach, I personally wish more Notre Dame teams would show some more swagger and confidence on the field, just like Kyron shows. How do you feel trash talk and jawing? Or how do you feel about trash talk and jawing back and forth? Okay, me and my dad have a completely different view on this. I talked a lot of trash when I played, especially football and baseball. Not in basketball because I was not a very good basketball player. I mean, I played in middle school, but like I was never going to play like varsity basketball player. But in football and baseball, where I was pretty good, I talked a lot of trash. I did. I played with a lot of swagger. Trash talking in not in the disrespectful, okay, now we're going to fight afterwards trash talk, but I talked a lot of trash. You know, you can't see me, you can't guard me. You know, like, I mean, I did. And sometimes I'm a little ashamed of it, you know, especially some of the trash talk I did in baseball. But no, I like it. But it's got to be real, right? It's got to be genuine. Like, you go back and watch the 1988 Notre Dame football team. Go watch them against Miami. The whole game, Notre Dame players just running their mouths, right? But it was a confidence. It wasn't necessarily swagger or trash talk. It was just, that's how confidence can manifest itself, right? I mean, I'm a big Boston Celtics fan. I mean, there was not a bigger trash talker in college in NBA in the 80s than Larry Bird, right? I mean, everyone will tell you that. But it came from a place of confidence. I mean, I was watching something, gosh, it was 2 days ago. It was Jamal Mashburn was getting interviewed on this podcast, and he was talking about how in 92, this is when Bird was already done. I mean, he was basically almost retired. He's had the messed up back. He was on the way downside of his career. And they were talking about how when they played the college team, and I guess Rodney Rogers, you remember him from Wake Forest, was kind of talking trash to Larry Bird. They said the next day when they scrimmaged, like Magic just kept feeding them passes, right? And they said like 8 or 9 possessions in a row, Larry Bird scored on Rodney Rogers. But what Mashburn said is Bird would get the ball and then tell Rodney Rogers what he's about to do, right? Like left, spin, fade, bucket. And I mean, just like, and then you'd hear stories about this from NBA players where Bird would like tell them, come out of a timeout, like, hey, I'm about to go do this. I'm about to go around this pick. Byron Scott tells a story how Larry Bird against the Lakers came out of a game, out of a timeout at the end of the game. Says, I'm gonna go around this pick. I'm gonna go down in this corner. I'm gonna shoot a jumper right in your face. And they came out of the timeout, and that's exactly what he did. He went around the corner, went around the pick, went to the corner, and knocked the shot down. Like, that's not trash talking. That's a supreme confidence. And I believe in that. Now, that can manifest itself in how you talk. It can also manifest itself in just how you play. It just depends on your personality. If a guy naturally is a talkative swagger guy, as long as it's not affecting his play and he's not getting penalized and it doesn't cross certain lines, I'm all for it. I'm a believer that you have to. I've said this, right? My first year of coaching, I was at Wittenberg University. We went first round of the playoff. We went down to Texas. We won. Second round of the playoff, we played the number 2 seed. We beat them 41-0 at their place. We were really good. We went in the third round. We played Mount Union. We were the number 4 team in the country, I think. Our players thought they could beat Mount Union. Mount Union players knew they were going to beat us. There's a difference. There's a difference between thinking you're good and then just knowing you're good and then going out and down. And Michael Jordan knew he was great. Larry Bird knew he was great. And they would let you know it. And as long as it's coming from that kind of place, I have no problem with it. I believe it. You go watch those great Notre Dame teams in the late 80s and the early 90s. They talked a lot. And they had some really good trash talkers. I'm a fan of that. As long as there's a certain level of respect that you have to provide your opponent. I believe in that. So, you don't get personal to certain degrees. But I love swagger. I love guys that play with confidence. But as long as it's coming from a place of confidence, I can live with it. So that's going to do it for our show today. I appreciate everybody being with you. Hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, hit the notification bell, sign up for the message boards. If you haven't done so already, come join us. We need more people that want to talk ball so we can talk ball all day long and not just here. So it's $4.99 a month or $49.99 for a year, or you can join the Booster Club if you feel like supporting the channel. So check that out. You can find it at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Appreciate everybody being with us. We'll be back again tomorrow, and we're going to keep rocking and rolling with all the latest Notre Dame news and information. Have a great rest of your day.